Today, Vita Coco is the leading performing beverage stock on the whole of the American Stock Exchange. Founders typically put everything they've got on the line and sacrifice everything they've got to get a business or brand off the ground. This is their baby, they've done all this. But at the same time, could be a blind spot about why the brand isn't reaching potential. People think that, innovation's got to be as weird, as wacky, and as different and out there as possible, right?
Yeah.
Innovating close to the core is the number one advice. If anybody's going to acquire you, they will spend sometimes six figures, i.e. more than £100,000 on conducting audits of your business, but more importantly of your brands. Advocacy will be in there, loyalty, retention, acquisition costs. They will know more about your brand, your consumer and your business from a data perspective than you will.
The other week, I went to that Houlihan Lokey event in the Park Lane. I got invited through Perry, and I, if I'm being fucking honest, I thought it was like a tiki bar in Clapham, like the Houlihan Lokey, and I said that, and everyone was like, mate, you can't say that. You have to be that bit closer. And I was like, it was like this whole new world. It was like the exit El Dorado, if that makes sense. Where everyone listening to this podcast is working so hard to get to this exit. Or at some point, some may not say they're not, but at some point there is this hope to get to an exit. And I was walking around this swanky hotel, and it just felt like there's this whole new world. And I've spoken to people who, like people like Amelia, and they're like, how do we actually get there?
Yeah.
And one of the things I've kind of learnt from being there and speaking to people there is that getting these deals done is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And I'd love to for you to parachute us in to one of the exit deals you eventually got over the line, but where it was all kind of hanging by a thread and it was up and down, and you were kind of, what were the thoughts? What was going wrong, and what were the thoughts in your head at night when you were trying to go to sleep? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Got you. Probably best example's Bear, right? That's probably the best one. And actually we use Houlihan Lokey advised us on that transaction. It's kind of where we start on this one. So I think there's a number of things I'd say, which is, look, getting to an exit is very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. If I just take a step back, actually, I think my genuine advice to most startup stroke founders is, particularly in the early days, people seem to start thinking and worrying and get distracted by exit far too early. And actually, it's one of those things, if you concentrate on building the brand, the business, and the financials associated with the business, wrong to say an exit takes care of itself, but the probability of you getting successful at exit will be stronger if you focus on building the business. Now, of course, as part of building the business, you need to also understand what constitutes and what represents giving you the best chance to get a successful exit. So that's the first thing I'd say. But
just quickly, so those principles are sort of brand, financials.
So we could have a long one on this today, but let's go through it all, because I think it's really important for you to understand, right? So the world has changed as well. So the first thing I'll say every time is everybody just obsesses about their P&L, which is correct, right? So everybody wants to look for strong revenue growth, and you talk about compounded annual growth rates, or CAGRs, and typically as a startup brand, you're going to want a CAGR growth over a 3-year or 5-year.
Sorry, I'm going to be a 3-year-old, so ask really dumb questions. Say that.
Right, so this thing called CAGR, which is compounded annual growth rate.
Yep.
So all that does is that takes your growth rate, your average growth rate over whatever period of time you want to select. So it could be a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year.
Yep.
3 years probably atypical. So it will say that, look, typically, if you're growing at single digit over a 3-year compounded annual growth rate, it's probably not that attractive. But as a startup, anything between kind of late teens up to a 60% growth rate on a compounded basis excites prospective buyers. So I think the first thing to say on the P&L is obviously the revenue growth. But if you're looking at me, particularly when I invest in businesses today, the number one metric I will look at on every single prospective, kind of investment document, which they call, again, terminology, information memorandum, which is called an IM.
Yeah, I learned that the other day.
So we'll do a glossary for everybody.
Yeah.
By the way, businesses need to be simple. We can get onto that as well, but that's another thing. But the first thing I look at is gross margin rate, okay? Because effectively, you need to set up your value chain on your business that you're making a good gross margin. And the reason why that's so important, and just to explain what gross margin is, and again, I'll keep it simple, it's typically, and again, the big problem we have as well is that people are manipulating their definitions of gross margin rate because they're trying to hide some costs, which should be in gross margin, but they'll drop it elsewhere in the P&L. Right? Investors have wised up to that, right? There is only one definition of gross margin on a traditional food and drink business. I'll talk a little bit on D2C in a second. But effectively, gross margin is if you take your invoice price that you sell to your customer at, if you take away promotional discounts, okay, which that gives you net revenue, which then is after you take away your promotional costs, that is what you call your turnover, and that is what you report to HMRC. You take away from there your cost of goods, what it costs you to make it, plus also your logistics, what it costs you to ship it to the customer, yeah? That then gives you your gross margin. There's also something called trade investment. So for example, if you got a gondola end and paid Sainsbury's £10,000 for that gondola end, that needs to come into it. But that's what you typically call gross margin. The only slight difference is there's another thing, whether you call it gross margin 1, 2, 3, it all varies across customers, is that when you've got a e-commerce or a D2C business or a business that is a hybrid channel, you also need to look at acquisition costs for consumers there, because people can be spending between 10 to 30% of revenue getting consumers in, and that acquisition cost has to come in as well. So people need to look at that. So a lot of
people sort of they can sort of shove it under the carpet.
It'll be dropped. It'll be hidden under gross margin in something like marketing or something like that, right? And I think it's really important that there's a clean definition. But just to give you an idea, so the number one thing I look at is gross margin, right?
Yep.
And I kind of have a gold, silver, and bronze view. That anything that starts with 30%, I say is bronze. Anything that starts with a 40% is silver. Anything gets towards 50%, I call gold, okay? And that's where you get excited, because the problem is that, and again, I do feel for a lot of startups, because, had a huge amount of inflation in the last few years. The majority of challenger brands have not been able to pass on the same level of inflation through to the retailers as the corporate guys, because either their brand isn't strong enough to put that inflation through to maintain the consumer demand, or else they've just not had the strength of business to be able to push it through as much as some of the corporates have with the retailers. So the reason why the gross margin is so important is that if you don't make enough money at gross margin level, you don't have enough to invest in marketing, in people, and in your overheads. And within overheads, you've got things like your processes and systems and all that. And the problem is you just continue running out of cash, because, if you're turning over £10 million as a business, but you're making a 40% gross margin, yeah, you've got 4 million then to deploy on the rest of the P&L. But if you're turning over 10 million, but you're only a 20% gross margin business, you've only got 2 million then to deploy on the rest of the P&L. So you need to be making a strong gross margin business to generate cash for the business as part of the working capital cycle, but also to be able to deploy it and invest in the brand and in the business. And then the final thing, just before I kind of come off the P&L thing, is that the world has also changed when you're looking at exits, okay? So I would say when we sold Bear, 70% or 80% of prospective buyers, we were talking about a revenue multiple as alongside an EBITDA multiple. If you go out and...
Just define those just quick.
I should have done that.
No, I'll be the baby here.
Sorry. Yeah. So obviously the revenue multiple hopefully is quite explanatory. So if you're turning over 20 million and somebody is willing to pay you 2.5 times revenue, and by when I say 2.5 times, typically people will take the last 12 months prevailing revenue is what the run rate is, okay? So if you're doing a 20 million 12-month run rate and somebody offered you 2.5 times that means effectively you'd be selling the business for 50 million, yeah? What's happened though now is that, and it's for various reasons, it's about, people wanting to see a proper business. It's also the cost of borrowing, all stuff like that. 90% of prospective buyers will only now value a business on an EBITDA multiple, because they're not prepared to buy or pay a high multiple against revenue for a business that is just hemorrhaging cash and losing money. They need to bring a business in that they feel can immediately start contributing to the wider group of what they're doing. And it's not surprising, because a lot of the businesses that obviously are looking to acquire are listed, they have shareholders, they have quarterly earnings that they've got to update with, and if they're bringing something in, it's got to very quickly step up and be able to contribute to the central group. So the big change is now, and one thing I'm talking to, because I've got just under 20 businesses now that I invest in myself, right? That's my portfolio. one of the biggest messages I can give everybody is that you really need to start becoming what I call a proper business earlier than you would have done 3-5 years ago. If you want to get a successful exit, you need to think about how you can become EBITDA positive. And just to explain EBITDA, right? So EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, amortization, okay? And that's effectively your net profit at the bottom. So once you've taken your gross margin, which we defined earlier, you take your marketing costs off, you take your people costs off, you take your overheads off, okay? That's then the EBITDA, right? And typically, again, just to give people just a benchmark, is that if I do bronze, silver, gold, I'd say bronze is 5% EBITDA and above, silver is 10% EBITDA and above, gold is 15% EBITDA and above. But the other thing that's really important, what a lot of people don't realize, is that, I can tell you now, right now in the market today, if I just talk packaged goods, the average exit multiple for a challenger brand is between 1.9 to 2.1 times revenue. And the EBITDA multiple is about 12 times, okay? Feels like we're going into like an economics lesson here, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But let me just explain why it's important. So let's just take that 20 million, yeah? Which I mentioned earlier. And let's just say we're going to get 2 times revenue, which is about average, which would mean the business is worth 40 million. But let's say that 20 million business, is only making 5%, okay? So that effectively means that they're making 1 million. If you wanted to get the 40 million, but you're only making 1 million, that means you've got to get 40 times multiple on the EBITDA. It's not going to happen. People are going to look at it and go, okay, in very exception it might do for various reasons. But that's why I'm saying that you've got to almost look at the two, because let's just take that example. On that 20 million, and let's say it's 2 times revenue, which is the 40 million. At EBITDA level, if you're making, 10% EBITDA, that means you need a 20 times multiple. That becomes more realistic if you've got a really strong and hot brand.
So you said out of your portfolio of 20.
You're still awake now, by the way. Apologies. I know it's worth people listening back to
thank
this.
God we're doing this. Thank God we're doing this first thing in the morning, mate. Because if this was the afternoon,
you need
double maths is when I always used to fall asleep.
You need that cortado.
Yeah. Fucking 3 of these. No, but it's super, super valuable because as even at this Houlihan Lokey is all of these, as I say, it's like Exit Eldorado in this kind of opulent Park Lane hotel. But you can see that's where the end goal is. And I suppose what I want to chat today about is how we reverse engineer what they need to focus on now.
Yeah.
And you said, there's 20 of my brands in my portfolio. They need to get to EBITDA positive business earlier than they initially thought. Or we want to sort of fast track that process. What are the 1 to 3 things that they, like people listening to this can say, right, the world's changed now. It's not based off revenue multiples. We're going to be in a much more advantageous position if we go off EBITDA. How do you kind of do that? Or are some brands so far down the revenue land that they're kind of fucked?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just put it
I think for people starting up or in early stages, make sure you set your value chain right in the first thing. So what I mean by that is that I see too many brands set up and go, okay, I'm only making 20% today, but I think I can get to 40%. Typically, margin only goes one way because particularly if you're dealing with the supermarkets, they want more. And as you grow, you have to kind of invest more and more, right? So I think if you're starting up today, try and set up the value chain of a business where straight away you can make 30, 40% margin back from whatever the consumer price, what margin you need to give the retailer down to then obviously what your cost of goods are. Try and set up a model where you can make 30, 40% today is the first thing to say.
Yeah.
For those who are slightly further down the journey, people just think it's growth, right? It's not. Be careful, it's not growth at any cost. And my advice is today is, and I've had this conversation with numerous of my involvements the last few weeks, is if you came to me today and said, look, we can have a compounded growth rate of 45%, but make 5% EBITDA over the next 3 years, or I could have 30 or 35% growth rate over the next 3 years, but make 10%. I'd want the latter. I'd rather, because 30, 35% growth is with a 10% EBITDA, in my mind today, is much stronger than a 40, 45% growth with a 5% EBITDA, because you need to rebalance the P&L, and it's really important that people, that people have a balanced P&L. And the bit that people forget as well is that if you don't have a good gross margin in the starting place, you're going to continually be fundraising and fundraising and fundraising. You just run out of cash the whole time.
And that's a war of attrition on the mind and the soul. For friends who've gone through that, that's where the fun sort of gets squeezed out of you.
Absolutely. But going back to advice, you said to me, look, top 3 things, right?
Yeah.
The number one thing that I want to explain to everybody is there's something that's more important. So when I talk about revenue, gross margin, EBITDA, let's just call that P&L stuff, right?
Yes, that, as we said at the beginning.
That's P&L, that's
brand,
financials.
Finance, let's go into the brand.
The number one thing is brand, okay?
Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand, right? Is that I've known businesses that on paper look absolutely exceptional because the P&Ls are unbelievable. But if anybody's going to acquire you, they will spend sometimes 6 figures, i.e. more than £100,000 on conducting audits of your business, but more importantly of your brand. So they will do brand health surveys. They will use very strong consumer marketing agencies and stuff to look at the categories you operate in and to understand how strong your brand is in those categories.
What are some of the metrics on those health?
So it will be advocacy will be in there, loyalty, will be in there. I mean, again, when you get more D2C, it's about retention, it's acquisition costs. So there's loads of different metrics, but it's basically it's kind of something called the Net Promoter Score, right?
Yep.
It's and in the consumer world is, would you recommend that brand, to one of your friends to buy? People will look at that brand, and I'll give you an example. If you look at something like in coffee, for example, there's been some really good startups that have done a really good job and got to good revenue numbers. But actually, when you look at the number of exits in coffee, there's not been many. And one of the big reasons for that is people are looking at that and saying, look, I think you've done a great job, but if I look at you against the likes of Nespresso, Illy, etc., I can't ever see how you're going to play against those guys because there's such strong brands in that category. But if you look at, again, if I look at what we did in Vita Coco, right? Coconut water, the brand Vita Coco became synonymous with coconut water. We had PepsiCo come in with Naked and also with Harmless Harvest in the US came in through another corporate. We also had Innocent coming in, obviously through the Coke system. And we got bludgeoned there. But the reason that we won on that is because we spent an absolutely obsessed every minute, every second of every day. How do we become the number one brand for the consumer on coconut water so that we became synonymous with coconut water? And that's what won through. And that's why when you look at the coconut water wars, and they were wars, it got really, really personal. It got very, very challenging in both, I looked after Europe, but also with Mike running the US. The number one thing that won us through, alongside a very strong supply chain, which we can always talk about separately, but was the brand strength, right? The brand that we knew that everybody else, Innocent was a juice player, Naked also was in juice. All we obsessed about was coconut, and we made sure that consumers knew that we were just always dedicated to bringing in the best possible coconut products, and that gave us such a strong, resilient position.
So it's fascinating. So I've been writing this thing recently about like the 1% of the 1% and how I've interviewed Julian Metcalf recently, James Watt, yourself today, Adam Ballon from Innocent.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, what makes these guys operate at a different fucking level, like the 1% of the 1%, and they have this thing called a barbell strategy, which is by Nassim Taleb, and it's if you want to be anti-fragile, super strong, you have to basically in investment is doing a few high risk things with lots of sort of low risk things.
Yeah.
You can apply it to life, right? And Julian's thing is simplicity and complexity. His whole thing is like he can hold complex things and simplicity. Adam's he talked about he loves race car driving.
Yeah.
He was like, that's actually a lot like building a brand. It's the gutsiness and the balls and the gung-ho to go around the track. But if you don't balance that and barbell that with some data, you're completely fucked because you're going the wrong way around.
Yeah.
James Watt, speed versus direction. He was like, I would rather move so fast and fuck up 30%, and then we can course correct by listening to the consumer.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting from you, mate, is it's this balance between these financials on the left-hand side, and actually, and it is the whole point of this is it's attention.
Yeah.
It's because I think so. You've got financials and brand, and I think what so many things do is they're like, right, we'll build a fucking amazing brand, and then kind of let them not neglect the financials, but not think about that EBITDA thing. And then you end up with an amazing brand, but you can't get an exit.
Yeah.
Or the other way around, you build an amazing business, but you have no brand. And I think, and I'd love to go into the Vita Coco wars to kind of, the coconut wars to really get into this. Yeah.
What you got to do is you've got to balance the business. And just to finish a bit on the brand bit, right?
Yeah.
Is that
I'm just going to check these lights, but
please. On the brand piece, right? If you think about it, is that You need to be a hero in your category, yeah? And that's the big thing. When we looked at, when we sold the bear business, we were the leading brand. We were the biggest and the leading brand for kids' fruit snacking, right? And that's what made a big difference. In Vita Coco, at one point in time, we had a 92% market share of coconut water. That got down to as low as 51%. But all the way through that time, regardless of market share, we were always the number one coconut water, right?
Yeah.
And that was the big thing, right? That's what buyers want to see. They want to bring in, if you look for a successful exit, they need to make sure that you're a hero category. And that's why if you're actually got a big turnover, but you're littered across 5 or 6 categories and you're a jack of all, but master none of those categories, difficult to get a very exciting exit because you're just not powerful enough in either of those categories. And that's not just for the who wants to buy you. It's more important, it's for the buyer, yeah? So if you're in a...
So when you say buyers and the...
If you're in a Tesco sold supermarket buyer, right? So if you're Tesco, Sainsbury's, whatever, right? My advice is always build really deep before you go wide, right? Which basically means, so if you let's take one of my current ones, Bio and Me, for example, right? We are focused on 2 categories. We've got cereal, and then we've got basically dairy, and we're not going any further than that at this stage, right? Because we just want, in cereal, we've got muesli, porridge, and granola, and we've also got some cereal bars, which sit as part of that portfolio. And then we also have kefir yogurts and kefir drinks.
Yeah.
They are billion-dollar opportunities in themselves, right? We are now just working with the buyers and just focus on those 2 categories and just to make sure that we're absolute heroes in those categories. We're getting loads of things, you could go and do this category, this and this. And actually, for us, it's no, we're going to build really deep because then we know if we become a hero in those categories, it really does help us then if for some point in time we want to exit that business, we're in the strongest possible place because we're very strong in that relative category. But the bit I also just wanted to mention to you, Dan, was what I don't think people realise is that when you come to sell your business, you are going to be sat in a due diligence meetings with not just the commercial director, the marketing director, the MD, the CEO, whoever it is from these big entities who are obviously kicking the tires on your business. These days now, there is a guy like you sat there with a laptop who is a data guy, right? When you go into an exit process, whoever's buying you, I guarantee you, unless you are very lucky and you have very deep pockets as a startup or challenger brand, they will know more about your brand, your consumer, and your business from the data perspective than you will because they have access to all of the consumer, shopper, and category data. So I've seen it, and funny enough, I was speaking with some of the M&A advisors in the last few weeks, and they were laughing. They were saying, I've been in some meetings recently, and some of the founders' jaws are just dropping because they're suddenly sat there going, oh my God. They're sat there going, oh my God, these guys know more about my brand and my consumer than I do. So don't bluff, don't bullshit, but also you've got to make sure you know your consumer really, really well because, the stakes are very high in an exit and you've got to realise you've got to be on top of your game if you want to get a successful exit.
The be a hero of your category piece is fascinating. And it goes back to that tension of you can build a massive business across multiple categories. I did Tim Rees from Vita Coco invited me to do that sales training thing for them.
Okay, yeah.
Which was great because basically, and they've got on their wall in their office like a panoply of different categories they tried to go into. They had like Vita Coco CBD, Vita Coco, all sorts. And and the lesson from that was we tried to go for these sort of land grab opportunities, and they realised by actually just doubling down on the core, they've grown a massive business.
Yeah.
But then the reason they wheeled me in is because they've got this. This will go live once it's launched, so I can talk about it. They've got this new treat SKU, which is absolutely booting off in the States.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, we've, and it's just, again, it's another barbell. It's like focus on core versus innovating new, focus on core versus innovating new. And you're trying to, and I think Aristotle's got a quote, which is trying to find the golden mean, which is that middle point. And that's where the goal is. And, they swung too far with all this MPD and then now they focus, now they're going back. And the treats, I think, is this new product that's doing really well in the States, and they're trying to unleash it here. So that's why I was sort of like how we do the sort of sell it into the retailers and make it fun and like convivial and all that sort of stuff. But how do brands find that golden mean in between those two polar things? Because it's like, how the fuck, do you know what I mean? Yeah,
but you've hit the nail on the head, which is people think that innovation's got to be as weird, as wacky, and as different and out there as possible, right?
Yeah.
Innovating close to the core is the number one advice I can give everybody about innovation, right? Because if you innovate, if you've got something in if your core business or your core category, your core SKU is really strong, doing different derivatives or very similar products of that is going to create more value for you, for the shareholder, and for the consumer, whichever way you want to look at it. And there's so many examples of that. So the Vita Coco one you've given, I remember, I was in that business 12 years. We did every single flavor, like passion fruit, pomegranate, blah, blah, blah. We did sparkling. We did everything. We tried everything. And then we sat there and we obviously had Vita Coco Pure. And then somebody said, well, look, the number one thing we've always known is people said, look, God, I wish it tasted more like a pina colada. So we were like, right.
That's the white skew, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's the pressed, right?
So
all we did was we took the great core pure offering and we basically blended in another 20-30% of your puree to create a much more richer and sweeter coconutty tasting flavor, which we call pressed, which was for those people who are real diehard loves coconut taste. That was for those consumers. And it tasted, obviously clearly no alcohol in it at all, but it tasted almost like like what you expect the pina colada. Within the first 12 months, that press launch delivered more revenue to the group than the last 7 years of innovation in total in 12 months. And again, let me give you one example as well of just in market that I just think so smart at the moment is that, again, look at the Red Bull juggernaut, right? Red Bull, at the end of the day, 99.8% of their turnover, or let's just say 90, whatever it is, 95, 99%, whatever you want to say, is their regular Red Bull and then their sugar-free Red Bull and then different pack sizes around that, right? So actually don't forget pack size and packaging is big innovation as well as obviously looking at different variants, right? They've tried tonics, they've tried Red Bull Cola, they've tried additions. All of them do hardly anything. But what's really smart, I think, that they've done in the last few weeks has been announced. So they've now launched Red Bull Zero. So they've looked at the Coke model and said, well, actually, let's look. They've got Coke, Diet Coke, and Coke Zero. So what they've done now is they said, well, do you know what? Let's do the same on energy drinks. So we've already got the sugar-free and we've already got the regular. But actually, sugar-free doesn't taste the same as the regular, but let's do a Coke Zero equivalent and call it Red Bull Zero. And they've launched that. And I guarantee that is going to absolutely fly. And, again, another example is look at Oatly, right? They have their oat drink. They then have the organic one. They then have the barista edition and stuff. Again, very similar product, but a slight twist or nuance on it. And these are all hugely incremental and bringing in new consumers.
The format thing's fascinating, and I think as you say, people can think because I'm an entrepreneur or a founder or even the team, it's like we've got to do something fucking, a bit like that Jaguar thing. It's like do something so fucking bonkers.
That's trending at the moment, isn't it? Maybe that's what it's all behind it. They know it's really bad, but they just don't say talk about it. Like
we've got to do something so wacky and crazy to really push the boundaries, and you see brands just kind of moving, as you say, away from their core category. And then I'm walking down another line, I'm like, shit, these guys are playing in here. And I won't say the brands, but like, that's crazy. But the format thing's really interesting because it's actually quite easy to do. And the sales director at Vita Coco was talking about consumption expansion.
Yeah.
So he was saying that, if you get a pack of 8 of those Vita Coco things in your in store, right? Say it's a pack of 8, I don't know the actual sizes. If that's in your fridge, you were going to bosh through that. And I know this for a fact from Diet Coke. If I've got Diet Coke in the fridge and I've got 8 of them, I will just blitz through them.
Yeah.
Versus if I've got one, it's like, all you've got to do is make the pack bigger, get that in. It's not that, but it's still, but then it's going to drive your sales. And it's this consumption expansion thing. And, I think it's what Dash do very well by doing those big things on D2C. It's like, if I've got one Dash at home, versus say 10, I will get through 4 a day. Because I'll just be...
You'll drink more in between the same, because let's just say, again, it varies by person, but let's say your average main shopping trip is every 7 days.
Yeah.
Guarantee you, if you get that strategy right, you can double, treble, or even quadruple your consumption over that same period by just getting the pack size. And you're right, you've got D2C. You've also got, a vehicle like Costco as well. You see people buying massive packs in Costco, but they're buying as frequently because they get the consumption. They're not running out during the period between when they're making the first and the second purchase, right?
It's
a no-brainer.
So that's another way to innovate. Is just literally the format. What about?
But there's also one other big thing on there as well, right? And this is where some of the brands are smart in the D2C world. Is that more you can get the consumer into the subscription model, the better, because consumers. Let's just say you've got consumers buying on D2C, right? Mm-hmm. They will basically buy when they remember or whatever it is, right? If you get a subscription model set up and typically you'll see a 10-15% discount, so it works for the consumer as well, they will then get a repeat order going through to them on a set period every single month. And you will just see straight away that once you get, again, Surreal have done a great job on this, by the way, which is one of mine. is that, once you get somebody on the subscription model, they stay in the brand, they're loyal to the brand, but you also generate the right frequency of purchase. But actually, if you're smart, when somebody's subscribed, you can then also get them to buy more and stuff like that. So particularly when you're bringing out, new varieties or whatever like that, they suddenly add that onto their subscription. And again, the volume goes up and stuff. But subscription means that you haven't got to rely on the consumer remembering to buy, because actually the automated subscription comes out again.
I hadn't thought about that. And it's kind of like, it's like the online version of the bigger pack, isn't it, really? It's just, how do you get your brand to seep into people's habits? I want to talk about this, and I think it's a really interesting frame to look through things, there's a guy called Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's business partner. Wrote a fascinating book, and he called Charlie's Almanac, and he basically has this rule called inversion. So you learn more by what's going wrong versus what's going right. So just avoid bad things. Wisdom is prevention. And he does this talk I think it's at Harvard, this commencement speech, and he's asked to give a talk about how to be happy or how to live a great life. So what he does is he says how to live a miserable life, and he says basically everything I've written down, just avoid that and you'll be happy. So you learn more by avoiding bad things. So I think he says, if you want to be really miserable, take drugs and booze, be unreliable, be envious, be resentful. Like that's his list. He's like, if you avoid those things, you'll be happy.
Yeah.
I want to apply this to food and drink. I mean, you can use any brand. Probably, I'd say a brand that's in maybe 5 or 6, maybe even Vita Coco, that's probably a bit too big, but around that ilk. Say you were to try and commit brand aside and kill off a brand in grocery, what are some of the things you'd do? And I think this will really help listeners to avoid them. So I think the first one would obviously be to let's drop the gross margin to say 10%.
So how would we succeed as a brand by obviously being more successful than others, right?
Yeah. How would you kind of kill off a brand? And that
a competitor brand you're on about?
No, your brand.
Sorry,
because that
I thought we were going to dangerous territory.
No. It's a really good reframe, because it basically says if you just avoid these things, then you'll be successful. So say with this podcast, if I wanted to kill off this podcast, it'd be like, right, don't post every week. 1, don't invest in the cameras and stuff. 2, don't prepare for the interviews.
And
I say for a brand,
So again, this is my view, right? And not everybody will share it, because people have got different models. And, my model is, because, some people invest an insane amount of money because they want to be the next listed business or the next unicorn $1 billion business, right? I'm a middle road sort of person. I want to invest and grow businesses from 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million, but I want to do it where there's a validation each time. So we will always check, before we put big sums of money down, we'll always test something or check something's right. So just bear in mind, I'm that middle level of risk in terms of building a business, right? But within that way of thinking, the things that I will say, look, if you want to kill a brand off, here are the things to do. So launch, or else agree a listing with a customer at a ridiculously low gross margin. If you're below 20% gross margin, because sometimes people will justify it and say, well, look, there's a marketing angle for this, it's amazing visibility, let's do it. Now, there may always be the odd exception of that. But generally, I would say, look, have your pricing parameters, give your sales team the pricing corridors that they can work within, but don't drop below that, because once you drop below that, you just end up burning through too much cash and you're not making enough money. And it becomes, unfortunately, a little bit of a kind of downward spiral from there. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. I think the second thing I'd say as well is don't buy the listings either, because quite often you'll see that people not just having to invest in a case price to buy it, but they also have to put big lump sums down, particularly like saying, you need there's a listing fee of 10,000 or 20,000 pounds. That's quite common in the travel environment, by the way. So if you go into those customers, like the WH Smith's Travel of this world and stuff like that, if you have to kind of pay for space in those sort of places, because it's a bid who wants a space in there. And some of those are great brand building sites, but you've got to make sure that you've got the commercial parameters right. Because if you haven't, suddenly you start hemorrhaging cash, because if the rate of sale is not strong enough, you go down pretty quickly because you suddenly invested too much in there, right? So I think be very careful about the support package and investment you put against certain customers. I always do it on what I call a percentage basis rather than the cash basis, to say, look, actually, we'll give you 3 or 5% of revenue back in marketing. That's fine, because you're only exposed to 3 or 5% whatever revenue you generate. But if you'd said I'm going to put 10, 20, 30, 50,000 pounds down, the revenue's next to nothing, you're knackered, because suddenly that 10, 15, 20 million as a percentage of the revenue becomes a huge amount, right?
Love that. That's very
So look at
delicious piece of nuance. That
yeah. So it's just details like that.
What other are there any other little details that could really kill off a brand? Because again, that's literally just putting a different thing on the form. It's like we'll do percentage versus cash, but it could.
There's a few which people will say, well, I'm being controversial here or not. I don't know. I think overtly criticising competitors and going on a marketing campaign where all you do is just diss your competitive set, I think is a very dangerous thing to do. Seen a number of challenger brands kind of take long-established brands in the category and do consumer campaigns that talks about how crap they are, how rubbish they are, and sometimes taking a swipe at them. And we've all seen some backlash in the media about that as well, in terms of inappropriate, and also people being asked to take ads down. Talk about your own brand and its own merits rather than dissing direct customers. I don't have an issue if you talk about in the category in general. So if you're doing something differently that's healthier or better than everybody else, so let's just take soft drinks. For example, let me take Dalston's, for example, which is one of mine. We absolutely are right to talk about the fact that we are sparkling water and we are fruit and nothing else, versus the fact that all those other soft drinks have got stuff like aspartame and stuff like them, which is a time bomb waiting. I mean, that's the next, your ultra-processed foods, we've seen already, but that soft drinks world is going to change in the next three to 5 years, because it's going to be regulation, because those ingredients are all going to get found out. And I think you can absolutely at category level talk about that. But what I don't want the guys at Dalston's to do is start calling out that orange brand or that lemonade brand or that brand and start dissing them, because I think it's a really dangerous thing, because you lose a lot of credibility as a brand, both with the consumer and with people in the industry if you do that.
Yeah, back to that sort of financial brand tension. I've been spoken to loads of buyers and on panel, and heard on panels. It's like the worst thing you can do is go in and diss a brand, diss a competitor. It just looks like you've got no confidence in your own self and your own brand, and that will seep through to the consumer. What else? Like, what are other ways to potentially kill off a brand?
Yeah, I think probably overspending on general marketing before you've got the brand established, and I've seen this the whole time. Which
like ATL campaigns.
Yeah, I've seen it. Like I've seen people running like tube campaigns within less than 300 stores, and you're like, why are you investing in consumer awareness when people can't even know where to, or can hardly buy you anywhere? Your best thing there is just, take a fraction of that spend, or even if you want to take the same spend, invest in proximity to purchase, right? Go and invest in the store. So if you're in Whole Foods or in a Sainsbury's, go and speak to those guys and say, right, how do we bring the brand to life in store and market it there? Because you've got a much better chance about educating a consumer who can then convert to purchase, and then importantly knows where to buy it as well. I just see too many people spending too early on generic consumer marketing before they even built out the distribution.
That's a glorious kind of linking this to Julian's barbell of simplicity and complexity. Is, as you say, a brand, and I've seen there's loads around London, it's like a brand's gone into 200 Waitrose stores and they've got a fucking ATL campaign. I'm thinking, this is crazy.
Madness.
It's like that is so easy to get complex on that. Yep. So easy to go and spend loads on influencer campaigns, so easy to go and spend loads on doing an event and a launch party, so easy to go and spend loads on, as you say, ATL campaigns. It's like proximity of purchase. That's the golden mean, a la Aristotle. I don't know why it's getting philosophical, but it is really interesting that. What would you say are some other sort of barbell tensions? And I sent you that, I don't know if you read it, that thing between the founder mode essay. And I thought that was by Paul Graham. I thought that was really interesting, because what he basically says is there's this I think you called it rightly so on our last podcast, founderitis, which I thought was a fucking brilliant, just a beautiful way of saying it. And what he's talking about is this tension between operators. Someone says you get called a very good operator, Mark Palmer, a very good operator. Then you've got sort of the founder who's sort of the more kind of they're
see it the whole time.
You see it the whole time. And I suppose what I think happens, and I've seen this firsthand, I've heard it happen. The Airbnb guy who in this essay basically talks about it. He says, founders start at the beginning, you need this founder's magic. As brands scale, you need to become more operational. And what basically happens is you get these guys who've come in from big blue chip companies who sort of say, we need to get the founder out of here because this isn't the way we're used to running it. The amount of times you hear someone say, God, the founder's a fucking nightmare to work with. He or she's a lunatic. And that happened. This basically what happens in all these businesses. And this founder mode essay, it's with some of the biggest startups in Silicon Valley. And basically the founder kind of gets pushed out of the business. Yeah. And then actually what happens is you go down the line and you're like, shit, we need that magic, because that magic's like, and that's a barbell itself.
Those guys know the fairy dust, right? They've got the fairy dust.
So how would you, what's your prescription to that for everything you've gone through?
Look, right, it's, again, this is my view.
Yeah.
Right. I think people have to respect founders, right? And sometimes I do see particularly institutional come in as a private equity and venture capitalist. And sometimes it's like the Grim Reaper. They'll just sign through the business and run it how they want, right? But I think from my perspective, you've got to remember founders typically put everything they've got on the line and sacrifice everything they've got to get a business or brand off the ground. And I've always had ultimate respect for founders to say, look, you've got to remember this is their baby. They've done all this. But at the same time, you have scenarios whereby founders are absolutely exceptional at what they do, but equally could be a blind spot about why the brand isn't reaching potential, because actually all the ingredients could be there to have an incredible business, but the founder doesn't have the capability, all the experience, all the skill set to unlock it. So where you've got, a founder who understands that, obviously, so I'll speak to some founders sometimes, and you bring either a management team or even somebody alongside them who's got those missing ingredients, together those dynamics become unbelievable, right? And I've got so many of my businesses where I've got really good founders, but also we've now put in people alongside that have just transformed the business. And it's nothing against the founder at all. The founder's still like 24/7, absolutely, full tilt running in the business. But, there's a number of things you look at, which is the founders know what they're brilliant at, but also know where their shortcomings are. And this, when you talk to me about why invest and want to invest, that's one of the big things I have to make sure that when I first met a founder, that I know that they are somebody who can listen. Because if you look at, there've been some really exciting brands and businesses which should have been really successful, but actually they had a founder in them that didn't listen for whatever reason, whether too pig-headed or else just actually, no, my way is the only way, and I think this is how it should be. And I think having a founder who listens is really, really important. And equally as an investor, I've got to listen equally, but you put in a complementary skill set, senior leadership team, or else an MD alongside a founder at whatever stage you think it's required, typically that will only do one thing, which is, make the business successful. And can I give you one of the best examples, right? Where we are sitting now, yeah. Lucky Saint, right? Luke, absolutely outstanding founder, right? I can't talk highly enough of him. It's one that I should have invested in, but, it didn't, just because of COVID and stuff, and it didn't quite happen. But, Luke's done an incredible job, but also he realised that, he was from outside of the industry, but also there were people in the industry that could actually complement him really well. Brought in Emma Hill, right? Emma Hill, absolute machine. Like, honestly, I cannot talk highly about her skill set and her ability to scale businesses. I saw her as Innocent, where we used to work together. She went and did the same at Grey's, and now she's in here at Lucky Saint, doing a great job. And this is a great example about how suddenly you can take a good business and a good brand to actually becoming a really exciting, great and outstanding business. Surround, as a founder, and the same way as an investor, right? There's one principle here. Just surround yourself with outstanding people. Never be too proud. Never be too much about, I'm a control freak. Put good people around you and the business will always be stronger.
What are the different types of operator? Because I think you've worked with, there's almost like different shades and textures. I think you talked about John at Innocent being like, I think on our first one we did at Bread and Jam, like he'd put any FTSE 100 business CEO to shame. You've got Emma. Like, describe with the operators across all your businesses that you've worked with, like what are the different types? Because I think the founder stereotype is very founder. It's like you can kind of, I've spoken to so many of them. Yeah. I kind of get that. But what would you say are some of these different operators and what are some of the lessons from each one?
You're right on the founder stereotype, but actually there are examples where they're not always stereotypical, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. Take Bio and Me, which is one of mine, right? You've obviously got Megan, but you've also got John.
Yep.
Now, John particularly is first-time founder, right? But because John is, I won't say in the twilight of his career, because it's probably unfair, but John and I are a similar age, right? John has a huge amount of experience. Therefore, actually, if you look at him running the business, I think he'll actually have a lot of longevity because he's run, he's been in big companies before there. He's been at Nestle, he's been at P&G. He's got great experience. He's also got quite an entrepreneurial flair. So actually, I think he will be able to take the business to a significant scale, whereas other founders, I think, will, potentially run out of kind of runway, and that's where you've got to look at bringing somebody in.
How to get your challenger brand into more supermarkets and increase your current distribution in half the time. Range reviews are happening right now, right this millisecond. Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Tesco, Ocado, Co-op, all looking for new banging challenger brands. Don't miss this range review and have to wait another 6 months. It's long. Don't lose precious shelf space to your competitors. Don't let your buyer pick another brand just because you didn't have a Grand Slam deck. North Star Category Management help you create banging supermarket pitch decks so good that buyers find it impossible to say no to. Challenger brands like Perfect 10, Trip, Bulb & Co, Dash all love North Star. Look, I am so confident in North Star transforming your brand. We've got an exclusive Hungry offer. Your first month for free. Yes, free. Plus, we're going to give you a free 30-minute consultancy session to see how your brand is currently performing in 25. Click the link in the show notes to book your consultancy session and thank me later.
I am absolutely over the bloody moon that Big Fish, yes, Big Fish, the big dons of Challenger Food and Drink brand design. I mean, Perry is an absolute legend. He's designed every Challenger brand in your cupboard. Charlie Bigham's, Goo, Tyrrell's, Rana, Clipper Tea. The list is endless. And Big Fish are looking to speak to the next wave of Challenger Food and Drink brands who are a force for good. They're looking to invest in brands, and we've got this sick thing coming next year that you do not want to miss out on. If you want to speak to Big Fish, if you want to go to the Fish Bowl, drop me a DM and I can make it happen.
So I would actually, that, and this is very reductionist, these two sort of buckets of stereotypes. So we need to be careful here. But he's someone who I would say is an operator with a founder's flair. I love John.
You're right.
He's an operator with a founder's flair. But then say people are looking for operators to come in to their business, and maybe we can talk about the different textures or styles. Like, what would you say they should be looking for? Because again, I've seen it combust, and the amount of times it's happened. So James Watt at Brewdog, so I'm never going to hire a blue chip. And all of this is nuance, right? Everyone's got their own way of doing it. That's why I love this fucking podcast, because there's a gazillion ways to skin the cat. Ben Branson, I'll never hire a blue chip person again. They're more founders, but then there are other businesses. But if you get that sweet spot right, and you get almost, it's not like product market fit, it's like founder operator fit, which is what Lucky's saying. Then it can fly. And some of my friends have got so many businesses, and they lack that operator. So what should they be looking for in that operations person?
So I think it's very much business and founder dependent, right? Okay. So I have to say I do concur that in 90% of times it's very difficult for blue chip people or corporates to come into a challenger world and thrive. Somebody will give me loads of exceptions, but where I've seen it in the main, it's been challenging to do that. And it's also similarly, it's difficult to get people to come in from the retailer side. So if you've been the other side of the fence and you've been a buyer, to get them to come over and actually on the sell side, that's difficult, because it's bloody difficult on the sell side. But also, I know that if I put some sellers, from on the supply chain side, on the supplier side onto the buyer side, they struggle as well. Some people are phenomenal at what they do, but sometimes you haven't got the transferable skill set that you'd always like to go into a different business or environment or a different role. I mean, look, it's a very difficult question for me to answer, because it depends on the business and the founder in question.
Yep.
But my answer to you is to say, you have to look at the dynamics in each business and say, look, so if you look at, for example, when I was running Vita Coco, for example, the number one most important hire for me was to get somebody strong operationally in. Why? Because supply chain operation bores me, and also is not my bag at all. So I knew that I had to surround myself with somebody exceptional there.
Who was that person?
And we had, bless him, not around anymore, unfortunately, because unfortunately he lost his battle to cancer, but a guy called Ben Wright. So I had Ben Wright who came in. So he actually used to work with Julian back in the Metcalf days and the Itsu days.
Yep.
Ben was just phenomenal for the business and did an amazing job for us. I'm still in touch with his wife and his kids today, actually.
What was so good about, what was the 1% of the 1% about Ben?
Ben was just an absolute, he was ex-Cambridge, smart as you come, right? Yep. Had the ability to, we had not just problems, but we had challenges the whole time when he's setting up. About, oh my God, how do we set that up? We need to do co-packing. Christ, we've got to source this. We've got to do this. We had very complex supply chain with, bringing stuff in from Brazil as well as Asia. And it's actually a very complicated supply chain. And we were also trying to basically build the whole supply chain ourselves. That gave us a competitive advantage. And yes, we had an American team who we always worked with, but Ben would eat through this work, but also just had the ability to make stuff happen. That's the biggest thing I would say. And you talked about this earlier, which is, there are a lot of people who on paper and also what they say strategically are absolutely outstanding. But there is a big, again, I can think of so many founders and businesses who I thought could have been successful, but unfortunately the founder or the people in the business didn't have the ability to be operators and to be actually deliver the strategy. And that's a big thing. Ben knew strategically it was the right thing to do, but then he could execute that plan as well and go and deliver it incredibly well. And that's the biggest thing I'd say, is that whenever you're looking to, it's like, dare I say it, you could build a business full of ex-Harvard Business School, MBA, all really smart guys. That doesn't mean that business is going to succeed just because they've got the intellectual powerhouse. Where's the guy who rolls up his sleeve? Where's the hustler? Where's the person who's a really good operator? You've got to have a real blend and dynamics.
That's the barbell
and
again.
I was probably that at Innocent, if I'm honest with you. You've got strategic powerhouses like Adam, Richard and John.
Yeah.
You've got Jamie Mitchell, who lectures at London Business School, right? You've got people like that. Right?
Jamie Mitchell?
Jamie was MD at Innocent for a while.
Yeah.
He went to work for the Bamford Group, and then also Gaucho, who was chairman for there. So, again, I understood about half of what these guys said because they were talking on a different intellectual. But I'm not academically smart, but I'm streetwise and I'm smart and I'm commercially smart. And therefore, I think and I believe I complemented them really well, because when it came to actually, we scaled that business from 17 to 120 million in 4 years. Having people like me and other people in the business, I think played a massive role, because actually making it then happen with the customers and scaling it up. And sometimes that was strategic, but more importantly, just being able to understand what you need to do practically to then make the things happen in store that meant that we were then successful. That is an important ingredient.
Well, that is the barbell. It's that sort of that strategic. As you say, you can be super, super bright, but they need someone who's a hustler. I think hustler gets a bad name. Hustle, go-getter, relentlessly resourceful, and then that golden mean, which I'll keep going back to, is make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think you can get people who are either too hustly and too go-getter, and they've got they're just like. And I'm more like this, just like running like a fucking headless chicken around.
But you do get people who've got a sweet. Some people are can do both, right?
Yeah.
Like, plucking out examples, right? You talked about Tim Rees at Vita Coco. My God, he's one of the best examples of strategic, but also being able to deliver and operate, right?
Yep.
I'd say James McMaster at Huel, another good example. Will Bowler, so Will's done a great job, did pop chips and then gone to do other stuff, such as Child's Farm, etc. And post that. He's another example of a guy who's actually very strategic, but can deliver as well. And I think this is what I came back to earlier, which is you've got to look at the dynamics within whichever business you're looking at and be able to do it. But I think the one thing I'd say on here, which is probably the most difficult thing for me, is, and you've mentioned the word before, is that I have had in my portfolio, but also I can see in other businesses where investors must be kicking themselves, because you've got founders who are suffering from that founderitis. They always know best. They won't let go of the baby because it's theirs and stuff like that. And you can just see potential just draining out that business every day. And you just want to go, look, just go with me for a bit, because you're going to see this business absolutely thrive. But you've got to let it through, let other people help you understand what that needs to happen to make that change.
Let's go into sort of the trenches in the coconut wars.
Yeah.
I think this is a great landscape to kind of explore this founder operator mode. So yeah, you're in the trenches, and as you say, you've kind of got missiles coming in from PepsiCo. Innocent did their own thing. I remember this because this is when it's like 2016 sort of time. Around then, wasn't it? That's when I started at Money Life, so I remember this vividly. And yeah, like what was say you're kind of in the war bunker or the war room, and you're trying to plot out this strategy to win the coconut wars. Like, yeah, just describe what was going on with the competitive landscape, and describe like your decision-making process to say, right, Ben, we're going to fucking do this. We're not going to do this. We're going to do this, and this is going to help us win. I'd love to really get deep into that.
Yeah, no, totally. So that's probably the most exciting, challenging, scary time of my career. That kind of about a 4-year period when we'd literally grown coconut water. We'd started the whole category in Europe. The guys done a similar job in the US. And I'll talk more about the European piece, because actually the US did exactly the same, but against a different competitive set.
Yep.
And came through it equally well. But let me talk about the European bit, because I think I'm better placed just to talk specifically about that. That's probably the most rewarding time of my whole career. If everybody says what you're most proud of, it's building the coconut water. And then, again, I want to be careful how I say this, because it's not in an arrogant way, but wrong to say seeing off, but
you can say that, yeah.
Temporarily, or for the time being, seeing off Coke and PepsiCo and Danone brands to the extent we did is probably my kind of, my most proud moment and testimony to the kind of people in the team that were built at Vita Coco. There were a number of things when I look back, what made us so resilient? One is we knew to understand how we were going to market coconut water to the consumer. So it was always about why coconut water and then why Vita Coco is a brand of choice. And we basically, there's too many businesses will go, right, first start any sort of meeting, strategic meeting going, right, okay, how do we grow household penetration? How do we get that next set of consumer? How do we do that? Our number one thing at Vita Coco was that, right, let's talk about our existing consumers. How do we make sure that they stay with us? They are spending a large part of their disposable income on our drink. We should never ever fatigue from being grateful for that and understanding what else we can do to thank that consumer. And that's what we're obsessed about. And the scary thing is what people don't, a lot of businesses don't realize this, but I'd almost say this is virtually the same in all consumer good businesses, is that, 20% of our consumers was 70% of our business. So if you can get that 20% right and you can give them 1,000 reasons to stay with you and why Vita Coco cares about you as a consumer, you've got a good chance of winning a battle, right? So that's one of the first things I say. So
just on that, just quickly to tease that out. One of the questions I asked Julian was, he goes, the only time on this with Pret, Itsu, and Metcalf's, the only time I've ever gone wrong and things have gone, it's sort of started with this and it's just this whole sort of cascading effect.
Yeah.
Things going Pete Tong is when I took my eyes off of the product and the consumer, and that's why I love linking all these different conversations together, because you have this sort of interweb of different knowledge.
Yeah.
And so when you were trying to do more for that consumer, and this is almost like the first play of this in this coconut wars. Is like, what were you doing specifically?
So we were looking. So we basically we knew what we had like the coconut newsletter that went out. So we had a load of consumers that we spoke to directly.
Yep.
We got in touch with them the whole time. We gave them extra discounts, do that. New products coming in, they got like our top I can't remember how many it was now, but let's say our top 250 or top 500 customers, when we launched Pressed, they got a gift box with that. Didn't have to pay for it. Just got to say, look, you've been a really important consumer as part of our journey. Thank you. We wanted to give you our new product before it comes in market. So just all those touches, we could find them. We had different events going on. They got invited to the VIP area, some of those consumers, because look, you've been with us, for this long period of time, you've always engaged with us. Come along and come and see us at this festival or this event. So we did that. We went through that, and we did that through both our direct data, but also our retailers. Obviously, a lot of the retailers have their loyalty cards and stuff, and you can see who's your highest spenders. Again, we target them through our retailers, and then through obviously it's called shopper marketing. So we did that. The second thing we did was that, and that's slightly associated with that, was we said, and this is where we got it wrong, by the way. So. Yeah. And you laugh about this, but people will say, well, Giles seems to know what he's doing. But I always laugh because whenever I'm speaking with, to people in the industry, you have to remember probably somewhere between half to 70% of the advice I give is based on mistakes I've made, not what I've got right? So this is one thing that, and we made this decision as a board, right? And we got our metric wrong. We talked earlier about key metrics in a business. So our number one thing when Innocent, Naked, and other brands all came into market, and there were a lot of them, was because the number one thing was protect our number one market share. That was the most important thing for us. We will always, no matter what, we will stay number one in market share. So one of the issues we had,
and that was your goal, and it was a mistake using that one.
But let me explain the backdrop, right?
Sure, yeah.
So Innocent, 7 years before coming into coconut water, had launched an orange juice, which they started off in a Tetra, failed dismally. Everybody in the business was going, cull it. But John Wright was like, no, we're sticking with this. It's going to work. We're sticking with it. It's going to work. We've just got to work out what we need to do, because we have to go after orange juice, because we can make, we don't need to just be a smoothie brand. We can be a juice and smoothie brand. And I can remember some pretty heated conversations in the business about it, John with his co-founders, etc. Coke deal came in.
Yeah. Innocent
then relaunched the orange juice into what used to be the Minute Maid plastic carafe. I don't even remember the PET carafe.
Yeah.
That created this identity. All of a sudden, you could see this beautiful orange juice sat in this packaging, whereas, Tropicana was hidden in this Tetra. Within 3 years, if not 4 years, Innocent had toppled Tropicana in Europe. As I understand it, virtually all of the Tropicana PepsiCo team lost their jobs on the back of it because they got absolutely decimated.
It links back to the you can just in format is innovation.
Exactly. So the reason I'm mentioning that story is, given what Innocent had just done to kind of PepsiCo and Tropicana, they're then launched into coconut water. So as a board, so there was me, there was Mike Kerben, one of the founders, and also Eric Milieu, who was from Verninvest, one of our main investors. We're sat there and we're going, look, they've just killed Tropicana. We have to really think very carefully what we're doing here. So what we did was we said, look, whatever they do, we're going to go toe for toe with them.
When you say they, that's PepsiCo.
That's Innocent and Naked.
Okay.
So the problem we had, and this is where
Innocent.
This is the problem we had, was that we didn't realise. And again, if I had the same information today, I'm not sure I'd do it any differently, or maybe I'd probably back the brand a bit more. But the bit we got wrong is that the Coke and Innocent strategy and the PepsiCo strategy was come into a market, we've got really deep pockets, we're just going to literally discount. So at one time, I think there was something like 9 of 12 weeks of buy one, get one free or half price in a row, right? So just literally bludgeon the market, drive as much trial and penetration as you can. And then over time, because obviously we'll then take all the market share away from the leaders, and then over time we can build that back up. So we were getting absolutely smashed on what you call average price. So back then, we sold 1 litre. The 1 litre was the real price fight on here. We were selling 1 litre at £3.49. Clearly, the retailers decide the pricing, not us, but the recommended was £3.49, and that's typically what was in market. Our average price was about £2.70, £2, well, I can tell you, this is how sad I am, it's £2.62. £2.62 was our...
The scars of war jars.
Was our average, right? It went down as low as 1.92 and was hovering around the early £2 while Innocent and Naked were just bludgeoning promos because we were going toe for toe. We were putting the same thing. And all we did was we just crashed the market. And actually, we kept that market share.
That was ruining your gross margin as well, right?
It was killing our gross margin. Yeah. Also, the retailers were going, hang on a minute, there's loads of volume growth, but actually suddenly... What was my most successful category in juice and smoothies, because they all loved us, because coconut water was leading every growth. So even today, that 1 litre pure SKU is the 4th biggest SKU in the whole of that juice and smoothies fixture, even today. Because any private label, orange juice or anything like that, it's the 4th biggest SKU. It's a power SKU, people don't realise. But they were like, guys, whoa. And of course, retailers at one point do like, obviously, if they can give consumers more value or shoppers more value, great. But it was to such a point, it was just devaluing the whole category. So the bit we got wrong is that we actually realised we didn't need to go toe for toe. So we then still gave the consumer amazing value, but we put about 10, 20% average price back on. We just changed the mechanics on promotion and stuff, stopped doing half prices because they weren't creating any value for us or for their... Because the trouble is as well, if you're at half price, why is anybody going to buy... if you're at half price the whole time, why are people going to pay the money at full price? Why should I? I'd be the same as
promo junkies.
This is what makes me laugh sometimes. I sit there in MAT meetings. I sit there where I hit people getting on a pedestal and start being principled as a founder or business owner. But if you ask them the same question as a consumer, they give you a different answer. As a consumer, I wouldn't buy that because it's been on this. You're saying something very different as a founder or business owner here, right?
Delicious nuance there, Giles. Yeah.
So anyway, it took us about 2 years. I mean, our share went down as low as 51%. I don't know exactly today, but I think Tim's done a great job at getting the business. I think market share is back up 75% in the UK, and I think it's very similar in Europe because we've got both very big markets in France and Germany now. But we slowly built the value back into the category, and actually coconut water is now still again, juice has had a particularly turbulent time over the last decades, particularly around commodity prices and obviously consumers dropping in and out as they're looking for other functional drinks. Coconut water has been pretty resilient all the way through. But, the thing I got wrong and the bit I'm trying to say is that we didn't back our brand enough. I still today would probably have done the same thing because we were paranoid, because we're always respectful, right, of competitors. But we actually going toe-to-toe was the wrong strategy. We should have gone down to about 70% of what they were doing because we just took too much value out of the category. And it was a really tough time. But what was amazing for me was that, and don't get me wrong, there was a lot of pressure on me and the senior team and the European team, but at no point in time did I think Mike as the founder or Eric, who was the other main board, because we're quite a small European board because we were also a group board, at no point in time were any of the behaviours inappropriate, or was there any pressure that was saying, you know, nor was a time where they were telling us, you're wrong, we're taking over here, you're the right thing to do. And, you know, surrounding yourself with people who, you know, take a collective and collaborative approach, and it was our decision. And we came out of it really well, but it took a long while.
So from that, going back to the war bunker, right? So as you know, kind of sending with Napoleon here of food and drink, but you know, so it's like, right, let's go toe to toe with them. Actually, let's reverse back, focus on brand. What are the other things you did? Because as you said, I think I don't know if those SKUs still exist now, but like in Innocence, I don't know if they still.
They still are much less distribution, but still are around. And I think coconut water is not. It's not a key strategy for them anymore. They've got other areas which are doing incredibly well.
Yeah, as you say, you said the highlight of your career is decimating. I think it's good to be competitive. I'm competitive, but you know, decimating some of those big boys. What else were you doing? What else were you talking about in the war bunker?
The other big things we did in the war bunker was that, I don't know if you remember back then, but literally the demand for coconut water was insane.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that we had, the weapon we had in our armory, was that we basically had built a supply chain that meant that around about 80 to 90% of global coconut water was basically owned by the Vita Coco production network.
Right.
So, but you know, at one point in time, we had strategic calls to make as a business, because we could effectively sell liquid to Coke or Pepsi and make good money on it, because they couldn't get hold of any. But we were like, do we sell it or do we?
Interesting one.
And actually, we didn't. We sold a bit, but we actually in the end we created more volume elsewhere. We decided actually we would increase our demand plans elsewhere, and we'd actually find more volume. So, you know, in the US they do run. You know, I don't know if you know, but Costco is massive in the US, right? And like an MVM, I mean, it's crazy. Like an MVM, which is MVM is the members value something. It's the Costco promotion, but like a 3-week American Costco promotion would do about a third to 40% of the total volume I did in Europe in the whole year. I mean, that's just crazy. You have 80 trucks loads going into one Costco thing. So we decided to utilize all the liquid we had by giving the consumers more deals and across more customers, and therefore we increased our revenue, because we didn't want obviously the water to go to waste. We obviously so I think our supply chain was unrivaled. That is the bottom line. And I think the big thing is our supply chain. When there was a period where demand exceeded supply, that gave us a big competitive advantage. That meant that we came through that war really well. I think the other things we did as well, which again, to be clear as well, this was about, you know, doing things in the right way. We also created value-add categories which made complete sense for us. So we did, as well as Vita Coco, obviously as in the beverage and liquid, we did Vita Coco oil, right, which was used for cooking oil and skin. So whether that was launched into all the cooking aisles.
That was the whole In with the Lucy B, Joe Wicks.
Exactly that.
Lucy B, I remember that vividly.
But that was massive. I mean, that was like
2016.
I mean, that was like 7 to 12% of European turnover, about 5 to 6% of global turnover on coconut oil. And again, it was great for us because it was synergistic. Because clearly, you know, what you drink and what you eat, obviously, you know, using coconut oil in cooking, in health and beauty and stuff like that, and hydrating your skin, etc., work with obviously hydrating in terms of the liquid that you were taking in. So it strategically, it worked really, really, really well for us. But what it also enabled us to do was a load of consumers came into the brand through, you know, skincare and stuff in the boots or in the cooking aisle. We then managed to get those consumers then to come across and start drinking it as well within the beverage part.
Back to your point earlier of like innovating close to the core. Is that innovating close to the core?
For me, it is, because
this is all very nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah, because the reason being, right, you know, back then we decided we weren't just a beverage company, we were a coconut company. We were going to use the natural, incredible, you know, nature's best kept secret, which is the coconut, has so many different qualities. We were going to bring that to the consumer in the best way. Now, we could have done it in so many different ways, you know, loads of bits, but actually where we focused on, we stayed predominantly in beverages, but we saw coconut oil as a big opportunity for us. And therefore we just worked with those. Now, we could have gone into other categories as well. We could have done an ice cream and stuff like that. We didn't. This
is the whole point of it. That innovation thing is nuanced. The pendulum does swing. And as you say, like as well as, they showed me when I went to do the talk, because it's like that is in the coconut oil is close to the thing, but is close to the core. But then I think there's like a smorgasbord of like CBD coconut oil, and it's like that's going out a little bit.
Let me give you another example similar to that today. It's like, so I have a lovely business. Well, I say lovely founders, Ed and Jess, on a brand called Freya, which is bone broth. I don't know if you've seen bone broth,
Yes.
but bone broth's going absolutely mad. It's this whole kind of collagen trend that's really gathering momentum.
Really good for you, isn't it?
Oh, it's honestly unbelievable.
Yeah.
I can't. If you see the predictions and the forecast of how big the bone broth is going to become is amazing. But if you look at that, it's another great example where you're going into two categories which are completely different, but actually it's hugely synergistic. It makes sense. So we have all the liquid bone broths where we either have we've got the cartons where obviously people then add it into a stock or whatever it is. We also have the instant bone broths where it's like a sachet and you have it like as a hot drink and stuff. So if you go to America at the moment, what's really trending, you go into Starbucks in the US, people go, can I have a flat white or can I have a latte? Can I have a bone broth to go, please? So all the coffee shops in New York are now doing bone broths to go because that's your health kick, right?
Yeah,
go inside it.
Yeah.
So, but what we also have powdered bone broth because it's absolutely crammed with so bone broth is crammed with amino acids. It's very high protein and it's obviously got collagen with it. So, a good slug, like a third of the business is actually the powders alongside the liquids. And people are like, so if you think we've got the food division, which is the liquids, but then we've got the supplements division. And actually, if you look at something like Perfect Ted, it's not that different. They've got obviously the products and the energy drink in the can. They then got the matcha powder. And people are like using the powder to put it in a smoothie or whatever, taking it as a supplement. And you're bringing in a completely different consumer set. But very similar need states, but providing the product or the natural ingredient in a format that works for the consumer, and that's working incredibly well. So, there are times in a business where, yes, there are closer categories to go to because supplements versus food, you might argue, could be slightly further away than me going between. I'm going to go into, like I gave you earlier. We've got a cereal and then we're going to cereal bars because they're obviously closer, but still are exactly the right thing to do. And Freya's a great example of that. Business is flying.
In terms of this war period, I think I just find it such because retrospectively it makes so much sense. What was the hardest part of that period? Like almost like where you're in pain, sleepless nights, and like would you want your kids to go through that period?
Look. Through what I did with Bear and Vita Coco, I had 12 years when nobody saw me, right? I was 6.5 days a week. I remember going on holiday with Penny and the kids, and Penny would be like, it'd be 3 PM, you're going to come out of the hotel room, right? And it was a necessary evil because that's what it took to be successful on those brands. But what I did know, though, was that there was a period of time where that was acceptable and not acceptable. So it was brutal, but I loved doing it. I know it needed doing, but I also knew that, my kids were very young back in those days. But what it also enabled me to do is, like, if you look now today, Dan, is that I have a platform whereby, I'm never going to retire, right? You probably see the sort of person I am, the energy I've got and stuff like that. I love what I do. But my life works in the following way, which is the number one thing is family. So the first thing to go in the diary is when all the kids have got sports fixtures and stuff. So I am the dad who's quietly sitting on the touchline every Wednesday or every Saturday watching my boys, whether they're playing, rugby, cricket, hockey, whatever it is. Just love doing that because I want to see them. So that comes in. Secondly, fitness, as you know, with me, that's the second thing in the diary. Yeah. So all my training and stuff. So no ball meetings on a Wednesday. Why? Because that's when I go biking with all the guys I train with. Can you not change it? No, because that's important. Yeah. And the third thing that work goes in, and I now work about 3.5 days a week, right? So
you go hard on those days.
Yeah. And I actually, my boys are 10 and 13, and for the last 3-4 years, I'm very lucky that I probably spend more time with my kids than any other parent does.
But you want them to go through that period of time?
Yeah, sorry, that's what you actually asked me, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it's like,
so I think
because that's where the character building is. It's like that's where the pain teaches the lessons, right?
Yeah, so if you ask me, the number one thing that keeps me awake at night, right, is, I've been very fortunate in life. You do need a lot of luck along the way, there's a lot of skill and hard graft, right? But all things, unless Penny and I go to Vegas and lose the lot, there's a chance there'll be a decent amount of money left for the boys. The number one thing that keeps me away at night is that how does that money get passed on to the boys where it doesn't ruin them? But more importantly, the boys have got to learn what graft is in life. So yes, I do want my boys to go through it. I'm not one of the so for example, we had a house in Southfields. We've kept that. And because, trying to get on the property ladder these days, right?
I'm still living, I'm at home at the minute.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke. And something has to be done about it, by the way, but that's for another time. But, we've kept a small place down in Wimbledon because I think that's what I want for the boys to have. So they'll get help on that sort of stuff. But
is that where you were living in?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But they'll have to pay a rent for it. They'll have to pay the bills. And importantly, I want them to go on a career. I think the big thing, and again, it may sound funny, but, I even talk to them now as 10 and 13-year-olds, I talk to them today about what is your passion in life? What do you enjoy doing, right? Because the number one thing I'm going to say to them is, right, I want them to take a career path that they love doing and they're passionate about. Me going into food and drink, or really, I should say consumer goods because it's more consumer goods rather than food and drink. I'm very lucky because I've done something I absolutely love, something that, inspires me, invigorates me every single day. I do expect my kids, though, to have to go through a really tough time because you just don't learn your life lessons if not. And I think it sounds weird, but I see it in what I do now with them and stuff like that. We do a lot of stuff with them, even at 10 and 13, and I definitely want. There's times when I can see they're not comfortable, but I'm happy with that because they've got to go through some of the pain on life experiences.
This is you can tell me to fuck off on this question, but like what was the biggest exit you did? Like how much sort of money did you make and how did that change you? Because I feel like it's something like people, as you say, it's this exit Eldorado, this gold that they think, what happens when you actually get the fucking gold?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You don't have to give specifics.
So I think I've said this before on a number of podcasts, which is, and people are like, oh yeah, it's cool. It's very easy for you to say that, Giles, sat here, but the first exit I had was Bear, right?
Yeah.
And that was several million, right? That was a good exit.
7 million.
Several.
Million,
yeah. I don't talk money.
Yeah,
don't talk money. And the only reason being is that it's actually not that important to me. And also, I don't know. I just think, wrong to say vulgar, but I just think sometimes I just feel like money's great, but it's not everything, right? And it's more importantly, it's not what motivates me personally. But I got a big thud, right, on in the bank account, and I genuinely didn't know what to do with myself. And I did the most stupid thing I've ever done, right?
Vegas.
No, we're not stupid, but this was the thing. So we spend a lot of time in Mallorca, and I have a house in Mallorca. So again, that, don't get me wrong, what's happened has facilitated that, and that's as much home for us as the UK now. But I remember went to Palma, the main city, and I've never had a nice watch, so I went and bought myself an Omega watch. It's called Dark Side of the Moon, lovely watch. It's not on, I've got a Garmin on, but now that's all I wear. This is a good example, right? Because I haven't worn this watch for 3 years. And I literally had a panic attack coming out the shop. I was like, why am I buying a watch? I don't need a watch. How can I spend a few thousand on a watch? I don't need that. And that was a big thing for me. So I got this big, thud in the bank account, and I didn't really, it was like, don't need it. That's not what motivates me. Kind of building brands, enjoying the journey, being a thorn in the corporate side, creating positive change, particularly on that positive change, the environment and sustainability side, obviously, 65% of my 80% of my portfolio are B Corp certified, 6% are female founded now. They're the things that excite me and what I enjoy. And that's, I get more out of life, at that side. And I think, so that's the other thing as well for me, Dan, is that people do what I do. So I hate terminology, but people classify me like a angel investor or a high net worth or whatever. And they'll say, typically what you'll do is that, you normally do 10 investments, and if one come off, it's all good. I don't agree with that. So of my 18 today, I've had 5 successful exits. I would hope I can get at least 10, if not 12 of those 18 to get to exit. Because I think if you're prepared to put time in, so I get my hands dirty, and I'm in a non-exec capacity, I really jump in and do everything I can to help the businesses. If you pick carefully, and picking carefully is about, first of all, with the founder, but then getting the right category and the right brand, I think you can really change those percentages that people say, like the 1 in 10. I think you can get, a much higher probability, and that's what motivates me and excites me. It's not the cash. The cash is great. But that's not the motivation.
It's Will Chase has got the best line for this, and he's obviously exited a couple of times with Tyrrell's and then Chase's areas. When you're in the winner's enclosure, you realise that all the fun was in the race, and it's like that's a truism. I want to talk about kind of addiction and obsession, because I've got I've got a hugely addictive personality, right? So like,
Who hasn't? Who's the founder, right?
oh, this is what I'm trying to work out, right? So I remember I went to, like, in my 20s, I was fucking partying loads, like staying up all weekend, like just sending it. And it was like, obviously just loads of insecurities that I was basically blanketing with booze and drugs and partying and stuff. And it was great.
You're one of many, right?
Yeah, one of many. And it was, anyway, so I went to go and see a therapist to see what was going up in the box, right? And he was like, mate, within 17 seconds of meeting you, I knew you were an addict. I was like, okay, well, like, you've got to kind of work with what you've got, right? So then I stopped all sort of the partying. I still do drink, but like, it's way less than what it was. Like, I've probably done 6 months off this year total. But my addiction has just gone straight into this.
Yeah.
I'm like addicted to it.
So it's how you channel it, right?
It's how I channel it. And I love, that's why I'm sort of, you saying that you're in a hotel in New York and it's like the gorgeous vistas and the sunshine, and you're just grafting yourself to the bone. Like, how have you got better at dealing with that addiction? I think you say I'm a triathlon addict. Like, I think, and I also think in business, it's great to say you're obsessed. Yeah. Obsessed is great in business, but if you say you're an addict in business, obsession and addiction are kind of two sides of the same coin.
If I was an addict in business, I'd be doing another barrel of Vita Coco. I'd just be going on to the next gig.
How did you ease off that? You see what I'm saying?
I think there's a few bits to it.
Yeah.
I think one is what's sustainable. Because, I've Innocent, I burnt myself out. I had some panic attacks at Innocent. I was similar to you. I basically, Innocent was a great business, very high pressure to work in though. I was also in a nightclub at 3 a.m., 3 nights a week. Yeah. I was also training 6 days a week. Can't do it. Somebody just gives you a tap on the shoulder and goes, nah, enough. So I burnt myself out. How did that
manifest in your...
Just suddenly had a panic attack. I just didn't, I was just like, what's going on here? And for a control freak like me, that was a big problem back then. Mm-hmm. But it's the best thing that can happen because, going back to what you're saying earlier about, you said you're an addictive person, right? I think there's no such thing as a normal person, right? We've all got a certain bit of controlness or addictiveness or attention deficit bit. It's just where we sit on the spectrum.
Everyone's
right?
on the specky on some
I think normal should be actually banned out of the English dictionary.
Yes.
I think it's the worst word in the world, right? There's no such thing as normal, right? But, as you get, I guess I've mellowed as I've got older, right? But probably one of the biggest levelers for me is kids, right? So, for example, if you look at my triathlon racing, yes, I still train a lot, but I don't race anywhere near as much as I used to because I enjoy racing abroad because I love going and seeing different places and stuff like that. I race about 30% of what I used to. Why? Because I don't want to be away from my kids. And actually, I'm no longer the priority. My boys are the priority, and Penny, my wife's the priority. And we always talk about my immediate family nucleus is the priority, right? And I think that's the big thing for me, which is both in business and to get where I got to in triathlon, which, let's be honest, wasn't an amazing standard, but for me was quite a good standard. I had to be really selfish because if I wasn't selfish, the business wouldn't have succeeded or whatever. But it's now not my time anymore. It's actually more about the people around me. And that's not just my family. It's also the founders and the other businesses I work with. Some of the founders I mentioned to you earlier, I don't give a crap if I take any money out. I just want to see those guys succeed because some of those guys, just the people and the characters they are, or the monumental shift they're putting in, I need and want them to be successful for themselves because they deserve to be.
Take me to that, because I'm 31 now. So take me to when you were 31. Because I think it's great you've got this, but you also you got to graft your fucking tits off as well. Like what was your day, like your brain like in that period when you were just at the coalface, like slamming it every day? Like, talk to me.
Yeah, my challenge was I've always struggled to switch off, right?
Yeah, same.
And that's the big thing. And my biggest issue is quality of sleep. And even today, it's quite an issue because I'm a thinker and I will always get more done in a day than most people get done in a week. But that's just me, right? But I've just, I've dialed it down. I've found different ways to do it. It's like, I don't hardly drink at all. The only time you'll get me to drink these days is like, I've got a good friend's 50th coming up in a few weeks' time in London, and we're all back. Well, he's put on a big effort for a party. I'll probably come out of drink retirement for there and have one good night. So I wouldn't call myself teetotal, but equally, I don't drink much these days. I don't have caffeine in my diet. But be clear, I'm not living a monk existence. I'm happier the person I am today and what I do today because I think I've got it's about balance, right? And all I've done is that.
Barbells.
Yeah, exactly. Like I've just shifted more towards the middle, right? Or else I've taken the really silly weights off the end and just put some smaller weights on the end, right? Whichever way you want to look at it, whichever analogy, because sometimes it's actually, the reason I give that analogy is sometimes it's very difficult for people to shift away from the ends. But what you know, taking your barbell analogy, it might be easy for them just to drop the weight on the end. So stay on the extremes, but just drop the weight on the end, right? Because if you're not, you know.
Yeah, so that's what so for example, on Friday, so I've done these teetotal periods.
Yeah.
And then I'll go to Ibiza, and it's just like, and then spend all my fucking money, and it's stupid. Yeah. And I'm just like.
You are 31.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, yeah,
and
yeah.
enjoy it, right?
Yeah, I know, but then I was like, why? And that's taking the things off, the weights off ever so slightly. So it's like, went out Friday, got very drunk, but then didn't drink Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
Whereas before it'd be like start
All the
Wednesday,
way through.
and then you just like,
You're scraping
if I start on
yourself-
Wednesday, I'm boozing Wednesday to Sunday. If I start on Thursday, you know, and it's what I'm trying to do is I've done the extreme. I've done the, you know, all on off. It's like,
but like founders,
isn't it?
Founders or endurance athletes, etc. They're all type A, right? They're all do everything to extremes, right? And that's the thing. The horrid thing to say is, I don't think you can be successful unless you are that type of person. Or it's more difficult to be successful unless you're that type of person. But you've got to understand about, on a ratchet of 0 to 10, at different periods of time, what's the right level to be at different periods of time.
Yeah.
That's what it's about doing. And, you know, I know in the last 5-7 years, I've completely changed a lot of the dials on the different aspects of my life across personal time, work time, fitness and stuff. Not got the balance completely right yet, but I'm pretty happy where everything is at the moment. And also, I'll be honest with you, I much prefer the person I am today than I was 10, 20 years ago when everything was high octane, was just full tilt and stuff like that. And I prefer the person that, you know, there will be some people that will say, oh, Giles isn't as much fun as he used to be, or, you know, just, you know, God, he just, you know, I think he just needs to chill out a bit and not do all these triathlon stuff. But that's my passion. That's what I love doing. And actually, I've got a huge friend network through all that. We go racing, you know, we go abroad, and look, I have so many friends through that, and you know, and do that. And or equally, wherever possible now, I'm going to take my family to wherever I'm racing. And guess what? My kids now do the triathlons as well. Their choice, not me pushing. I'm not pushy dad who's going, get on that start line, jump in some ocean and get swam over by another 20 kids or whatever it is. But I think what I'd say on this podcast is that everybody's got to do a bit of soul searching. Forget what everybody else is telling you. You know, forget trying to be everything to everybody. Work out for whatever period of life you're at, what's going to make you happiest, right? Right? Happiness does not necessarily equal success or equal money or stuff like that. And it might do for some people, right? And, you know, some of the megalomaniacs, and we've seen them in these big, massive corporate companies, it's all about the coin and about the money for them, right? But, you know, whether it's talking about me or talking about you, Dan, you know, it's that kind of going on that journey to say, right, what do I want out of my life, and what you know, what are my passions, what do I want to do, what do I want to enjoy, and just going after that. And, you know, it's just, I think it's where people get it so wrong, because they spend all their time looking at everybody else and all the whole situations, and it's just nuts.
Yeah, the coin is such a sort of vista and illusory thing in the distance. I want to go back to kind of that when everything was hanging by a thread with one of those exits. And kind of just we'll wrap up that. Well, because that was the start of it. I always go around like this is part of the value of the. Yeah. I like to go all over the place, but I'd love to go back to that, and then we can begin to wrap this up. But yeah, that moment when it's all hanging by a thread. You say you don't sleep at night. Like, what the thoughts going through? Why is it hanging by a thread? Like, take us into your bedroom at night. Like, what's going on in your soul? You know?
Yeah, I mean.
I think first, why was it hanging by a thread, actually, to give some...
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, right? So, no, yeah, actually, let me answer that slightly differently. So, what used to make me lose sleep at night was I was always worried about what other people were thinking about the job I was doing and what, you know, I was doing. And I quickly realised, screw everybody else. This is about me. And actually, it's about my immediate family, and then everything else. Once I got that rule sorted out, life was then great, right? Because I was always worried about trying to call it people please, whatever, trying to do the best job for everybody else. When I'm like, no, actually, I'm going to start doing it a bit for me and the family, right? So I think that was the first thing. I think hanging by a thread. I mean, look, the Bear deal went through. We were quite lucky, actually, but even then, when you think you've got an incredible business, watching people drop out of process is pretty scary. And again, one of the biggest advice I say to founders is to say, look, everybody say, I'll give you a classic example here today. People will go, I'm not selling to private equity or venture capitalists. I'm definitely doing it.
Again, three-year-old.
Yeah.
What's the difference between private equity, venture capitalists, M&A? Because, Tim from Rothschild drew this out for me the other day. It is quite nebulous unless you're in that world. As I say, it's a different sort of universe.
So institutional capital, right, which is basically people who have funds, some are family offices, some they just raise money off different sources. Again, I don't know the exact definitions, but just private equity and venture capital are just, they are funds where they've got money that they invest into businesses. Well, typically, so private equity is more about 3 years, looking to return the money in 3 years and look to basically try and treble their money in 3 years. But the trouble is with cost of borrowing, they're even now talking about 4 times in their money in 3 years because that's the sort of return that they need for investors, right? So you've got, so if you think about private equity or venture capitalists, you'll sell a business to them, but typically you or the management team stay on as part of that journey, but they'll want to flip it for the next.
That's venture capital.
Yeah, and private equity typically, they'll come in, they'll buy the business or a significant minority or a majority stake, and then they'll flip it again in 3 years. Again, it's not 100% that rule, but a lot of funds and actually some of the financial regulations mean that they have to operate in certain ways. So again, I'm no massive expert in that, but typically what that means though is that you are under the pump a lot because they have investors that they have got to return the money for. They'll have somebody who sits on the board. They normally have some really bright young kid who's normally sat there asking you 100 questions a week while you're running it.
With the laptop,
and I understand why, because the stakes are high for them. So, when you look for an exit, there's various things. So you've got obviously an institutional exit, which is private equity or venture capital, but that typically means that you are exiting or realising some value, but you're actually, most of the management team or you as founder are more likely to have to play a journey on the next part or next stage of the journey because it will then get flipped again.
And that's when they keep the founder on. Yeah.
Not always, but
most of the time,
Well, more often, it's interesting. You talked earlier about sometimes you'll have a founder and an MD comes in.
Yeah.
If an MD is doing an outstanding job and actually the founder's got to a stage where they can't take the business any further, that's where you'll typically see a founder exit in that scenario.
Yeah.
But sometimes, they'll keep them on just because they'll take a view that actually it's important that they're still associated with the business. But it's very much
magic, isn't it?
It's very much circumstantial. So you've got an institutional exit, which is private equity or venture capital. And again, that doesn't have to be 100%. That could be staged as well. It could be like an earn out over X years. And that's another thing to say is that these days, virtually all exits are on a staged basis. So you'll typically sell the business or sell a part of the business for initial consideration or initial amount, but then you have targets to hit over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year period, then unlocks the rest of your earn out or goes to 100% sales. So again, I could talk about it because it's been public domain, is look at someone like Sir Tom Mercer, again, lovely guy, sold Mama to AG Bar. First stage, and then 3 years later, it was then in the papers that and then they bought the rest of the shares of Mama, and now it's a complete exit. So that would be an example there, right? So you've got institutional money, you've then got trade sale, right? So that's what, like example I just gave you of Mama there, where you've got a big corporate or a big food and drink or a big consumer goods company or consortium will buy you, and then you've got an exit there. But also there's the third exit, which is one that we took on Vita Coco, where we floated it. We IPO'd the business on the NASDAQ in the US.
That's quite rare, right?
It is, but it's rare. But again, if you talk about hanging by a thread, it's very interesting because when you look at the Vita Coco journey, and again, I want to be careful here because I don't want to talk out of turn here because, I headed up Europe and played a big role, but equally Mike and Ira and others were the founders, so they're probably better to talk to me about this. But we came very close to selling that business on a number of occasions. But what's really interesting is that I'm a big believer in fate, right? And I also think good things happen to good people. And, Mike and Ira, and also a lot of one of the beautiful things about Vita Coco is just full of great people, right? And that's what fun in business is important, right? That's the number one mantra. You've got to have fun in business. And I'm a big believer in fate. And I even though that they were at the time, I can remember being with Mike. We had also another problem in London. We came over and we almost did another transaction, and there's a big fallout, and it fell apart in there. And I remember having sat there having a beer with Mike afterwards and just like head in the hands going, what are we doing wrong? Are we jinxed here?
I think that's another thing that no one really talks about enough is how many deals don't go through. Oh. Like we've just got our family friend who's just about, we literally went for drinks to celebrate the exit. Then that's what Piper Sandler have done, Harvey and Brockless, the guys I used to do for. We're clap the batsman, pass me the fucking oranges, let's have some tequila, and then the next thing gets to Monday and the deal's off.
I know,
and it's just like, and then it's back to square one. It's like how many deals do you think? What's the capacity to deal with? I would say
95% of deals fall through.
Wow. And what happens is like, is there anything brands can do to protect themselves of that, or is it kind of?
Probably do a whole podcast on that, right? I mean, it's so circumstantial.
Yeah.
It can be different reasons. It can be characters in the business. Suddenly it just doesn't click for them, or the deal's done, but then they're going to take it to the group board. No, we don't like that. But this division, the food and drink division, want to buy it, but they go to the group board. No, don't want it to happen. Or else they announce to the city, latest results, they aren't quite good enough. Actually, we're pulling the acquisition because we've got to redirect the funds elsewhere. There's so many different nuances of what can happen. But just going back to that Vita Coco story is that the IPOs are rare, but a lot of people do it, right? It is very expensive to IPO a business, particularly in America. But the reason I believe in fate is if you now look at Vita Coco, so we floated at $16. Today, Vita Coco is the highest and leading performing beverage stock on the whole of the American Stock Exchange, right? It's continually hitting results. It's at a record high at the moment. So so for shareholders and investors who've come in since the launch, it was at $16. I think it closed last night at $36.28 or something like that. And its high has been $37 which was 2 weeks ago. So it's done an incredible job. So everybody says, is it a good idea to float a business? Yes, it is. But again, if I was to talk to like a Fever Tree or an Oatly or a Beyond Meat, all who floated, but their share prices are all down. Fever Tree not as much these days, but if you look at like an Oatly or a Beyond Meat, they're down at, I think people have lost like 97% of their value because they're down at like 3% of the original share price. So it's not, the bottom line is, if you're going to float a business, this is in my mind, if you're going to float a business, you have to know that every single quarter you can hit your numbers. You have to hit your earnings, right? Which is obviously your bottom line, your profit thing. As soon as you have one wobbly quarter, share price just plummets. So you've got to have, what I mean by that is you've got to have a stable, go onto the stock market, but know that you've got a stable enough business that you can pretty much nail your numbers the whole time. Because if you've got a really volatile business, the market doesn't tolerate the ups and downs as much as a private owner would do.
When you get to that exit El Dorado, what should I call it, like where the gold lies, what are some of the things founders can, or not even founders, just like operators or anyone in the business, like what are the things that they probably, they don't think about but should be thinking about, and because you've gone through many of these processes, like what are the, we talked about earlier about how to kill off a brand, which would be like the gross margin.
The number one thing is,
one is
be able to demonstrate how strong your brand is, the number one thing,
Yep.
2 is make sure you've got both good growth, which I call the compounded annual growth rate, and EBITDA. So have the balance between the two between now. 3, make sure if you've got a portfolio, make sure you've got absolute heroes in certain categories. It's like if you're selling a business. If you came to me and said, right, I've got a business that's turning over 30 million across 6 categories, or I've got a business that's turning over 20, 25 million in 2 categories. I almost guarantee you the business that's doing 20, 25 million in 2 categories is worth more than that one doing 30 million in 6 categories.
Yeah.
Or 35 million or 40 million.
Yeah.
So, being a hero and being a lead brand, and when I say lead, by the way, it doesn't have to mean you're the biggest, right? If you are leading growth or winning on consumer surveys, and I'll give you a good example of this. Take Pip and Nut, for example. Mm-hmm. For me, I think that's the leading brand in nut butters at the moment. Just overtaken Meridian, but not quite as big as Whole Earth. And you may have seen Whole Earth got bought the other the week. But so, it's about you're on that trajectory and actually you can get to being, you're the fastest growing, you've got the scale, and you might not be at number 1, but somebody's excited because they feel it's about if you think about, if anybody's going to buy you, they have, particularly the corporates, right? Taking you from again, I'm just plucking numbers here, taking you from 20 to 50 million isn't enough for these guys. Most of these guys need to have 100 150, 200 million brand in their portfolio. So when they're buying you, they have to have a view. So when Jan Boone, Jan and Isabel from Lotus bought Bear, so we had this Alpha Bites, we had paws and stuff in baby, and we're really excited about the Alpha Bites and cereal. So Jan just said, look, don't be too rude. Can you just talk to me about yo-yos? How do I make yo-yos, which is, you're telling me it's the number one kids snack and it's the number one lunchbox item in the UK. How do I make, you're doing 20 million on that at the moment. How do I make that 100 million in the UK? Can we just talk about that? It's nothing else. And he's done this exactly the same because, Biscoff and Speculoos, which is all that whole thing. And again, talk about how you innovate brilliantly with Lotus is a great case study for people to use. He has, 30 brands in the Lotus family, but I can tell you now 90% of the focus goes on the Biscoff brand, right? That's all they worry about is the Biscoff brand because it's so powerful and strong. And that's what I mean. So you have to have be able to demonstrate that your brand has the potential to go to that level. Other things to look at is show the brand can travel. So if you're only in one category and you've gone into a second category and it's doing really well. So for example, on Bio and Me, we've gone into...
That's why Pip went into those stuffed bars.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah,
so that's innovating close to the core, but also in a different category.
Or Bio and Me's gone into cereal, but also gone into yogurts and drinks. Great example there. And people are saying, well, aren't they quite different categories? Well, yes and no, but gut health... Obviously, we've got it in cereals, but actually, the heritage of gut health is in dairy, right? Because if you go back to the years, do you remember when every fridge originally, every fridge had a Yakult or an Actimel in it. Do you remember in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s? Yeah. And literally, I remember as a kid, boom, I'd be given one of those every morning. And particularly when you go to continental Europe, like in France, for every 1 metre of the UK, we have a yogurt space. They have 3 metres. They have 3 times more space than the average supermarket. So if you can get things like the dairy side right in those continental European markets, huge upside. But also, there's a lot of players like you take a Danone or something like that. They'd be very excited in that sort of business. So
that's the other thing is how important is it to think reverse engineer of who you're going to sell to?
Totally, yeah.
So can
I give you the best example of that one, right? And let me go back to my Innocent days. And I think the boys would be okay me saying this, but which is. So this is sometimes where, and I think I mentioned this with you before you and I sat down and chat. You might have at some point a conflict between what's right for the consumer and what's right to get you a successful exit. And let me explain that, right? So at Innocent, we, depending on which day of the week you were looking at and whether we were fighting it with the government and HMRC, a smoothie gave you 1 or 2 of your 5 a day, right? For the portions of fruit. So let's just say we were 2 of the 5 a day and we spent a lot of money fighting that. Somebody at Innocent came up with genius because you remember, particularly the government were backing. Remember the fight, get your 5 a day. Mm-hmm. We're going to create veg pots, and we're going to do 3 portions of veg in there. So how good is this as a consumer that you get 2 of your 5 a day on your fruit through the smoothie, and you get the veg pot 3 of your 5 a day. You got 5 of your 5 a day through Innocent. So you just buy a veg pot and a smoothie, and there's your 5 a day. High fives, everybody's going, genius, absolute brilliant. So we launched veg pots. Slight challenging, short shelf life, similar, blah, blah, blah. Absolute brilliant. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but let's just say back then we were turning over 120 million, of which veg pots was, 8-10 million. Brilliant. However, when it came to looking to sell that business, okay, there were some exceptions, but 90% of people who are interested in Innocent were going to be a beverage operator. So when Coke came in and did the deal, they valued the business, but they virtually put a line through veg pots and said, that's our strategy for us, we're a beverage company. So actually the 8 or 10 million didn't really get any value. It might have got a 1 times revenue. I don't even think it got that. And what happened with that was veg pots got retired and Paul Brown got it for free and launched Bowl.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an example there. I'm just using that example there to say, look, consumer...
Well, that's
great.
Just happened with actually, I won't talk about it. I'll cut this out. But they basically exited for fuck all. So you've done all that work, and actually, when you've got...
And this is why it's about being master of a category and doing exactly that. And this is a big thing for me, which is you will sometimes come against that. And it doesn't mean actually, because it depends on, if you're actually thinking, well, actually, I might still sell that business to VC or private equity, or else actually my kids might take that business over or whatever. But if you're looking for a clean trade exit, you've got to think very carefully about those dynamics.
I said I was speaking to Amelia.
Is this Amelia at Bowlby?
She's a very good mate of mine. And, they're fucking flying. They're out of
she's doing an amazing job.
Everything you've said, they're doing all of that. But I was like to her, and it sounds like the dumb 3-year-old. She was like, who do I? Is it like fucking selling a house? Are you calling an estate agent? Do you have to court these people? Do they court you? Like when you and say we're speaking at the end of mine, we know where the exit Eldorado is. It's like how do brands begin to know who to go for, who's going to buy it? That's so nebulous in the grand scheme of things.
So my 3 bits of advice or 4 bits of advice I'd give on that would be, so first of all, if you're doing a great job and if you're powering on, you should find that some people come to you and just introduce themselves and say, come knocking, right? Yeah. So I think that's the first thing. Build a great brand and build a great business alongside that brand, and you should find that people start courting you anyway. Other thing I'd advise as well is that there are a number of M&A, and M&A obviously mergers and acquisitions, stroke corporate financiers who, whether they represent on the buy or sell side, are continually representing people to buy or sell consumer goods brands. So, you and I spoke about some of the names earlier. You've got the banks with Rothschilds, and you've got people like Piper Sandler. Then you've got others such as more like boutique corporates such as Houlihan Lokey or Spain Lindsay or Atlanta, for example. You should go and engage with those guys and say, look, just want to put us on the map. Just talk about where the business is at. This is what we're doing. A little bit about what we're trying to do. Because those guys, day in, day out, are speaking to all of the CEOs, board, non-execs, M&A, head of M&As in those sort of companies about, okay, what are you looking at in market? Are you looking at acquisitions? Because sometimes they're given a mandate to say, look, okay, bad example, right? Okay, but let's say, like, we've got a mandate to spend up to.
You say mandate, sorry.
So a mandate is they will put in a request to say, it's like me going to an estate agent and saying, right, I go to an estate agent and say, right, can you find me a £1 million 3-bed house in postcode SW18, needs to have these 5 things. Can you go away and find that for me? So the estate agent will go away and try and find something that match that. Mm. It's not uncommon. It's very, very common that the big corporates will say, look, we've done a whole strategic review of our business. We believe in within our own brands, we've got this capability, but there's 2 or 3 key consumer macro trends coming up, or else categories that are exploding, we want to get into, or we have exposure on. Can you find me, a protein brand, or can you find me whatever brand it is?
Okay, yeah.
And if you've got to introduce yourself and have these conversations, then they can tee up those conversations for you. And sometimes, don't forget, it's like you might not be ready to sell, but you can also have a conversation, but also you can bring somebody on a cap table as a minority investor, because a lot of these businesses have incubators. Now, yes, there are some pros and cons. Some people say, well, yeah, but if I bring them on, does that mean that if I want to sell it eventually, I won't get as good a multiple because maybe they've got something in the legals that says that they get the right to buy at a certain price? Or actually, if I've got Nestle coming in, putting like a minority stake in, does that mean someone like Unilever will never ever buy me because they're never going to buy a business that's got somebody like Nestle on as a minority thing? So there's all those things to think about. But surround yourself by the advisors and people who've been through these sort of processes. It will help you make right decisions. But fundamentally, if to take that example you're saying with Amelia, keep doing what she's doing because she's building an incredible brand. Everybody's talking about that business. It's also an area. What I love about what she's doing, and this is why this is what inspires me. This is what I love doing is that she's done it in a really unsexy area, right? Canned and packaged grocery. Like people say, well, I have this mantra that every category needs a challenger brand, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There was nobody's disrupting pulses and grains and stuff in there. She's gone in there and done an incredible job on a commoditized private label. When I talk about private label, I mean like retailer branded. Why do you need a challenger brand in there? Look what she's done to that category. She's like revolutionized it.
I wrote a newsletter that was all about this, and I was basically saying like why USPs, unique selling points, are kind of dead, and actually what is a better move is unique category play. So instead of trying to so for example like super busy category at the minute is those sort of gut health drinks. Everyone's fighting. It's like the other way, which you can do, and there will be some winners. The other way is to say pick a category that hasn't been innovated in for yonks, and just go there and be the first. So Amelia's doing it with bold bean, Oatly did it with oat milk.
Yeah.
You know, Jim Carn is now doing it with curry sauces. Like, like curry sauces, like that was such a commoditized market for ages. It's like, and I completely agree. Like there's a challenger brand in every category.
Do you know what this all comes back to? And I think Adam Ballon, who you've had on the podcast before, he said it as well. And it's my number. I talked about number one things on the P&L and the building your brand, right? The number one thing that this comes down to, if you want to build a brand, but also if you want to successfully exit, the number one advice or the number one thing I look at in any investment I look at is the consumer why strong enough? That's the big enough. And let me explain that, right?
Go for it.
For your brand or business or the category you're in terms of what you're doing and the brand you're doing, your product or service you're providing, why is that going to be so desirable for a consumer in terms of better meeting an existing need state or meeting an untapped need state? And let me give an example recently. So obviously I'm in gut health already and a number of brands. So obviously we talked about Freya earlier, obviously you got BioMe, Dolson's, we've also got carb soda. But if I look at gut health, I reckon I've had 14 gut health sodas come to me in the last 3 months with, I'm launching this gut health soda. And I look at them all, or most of them, and I can't actually give you a reason why the consumer should pick it up because consumer why isn't strong enough. And it's no different than when I was on coconut water and somebody said to me, I'm launching birch water, I'm launching melon water, I'm launching, I can't even think of it, rosemary water, whatever, they all came. Yeah, but why? Oh, it's great tasting. Why? Well, it does this. There wasn't a real, it's not coconut water. Why coconut water? It's got twice the potassium of a banana. It's all about electrolytes. It's electrolyte. So when you look at a proposition or your brand, what is the why? Is the why strong enough for the consumer? How are you going to tell them about it? Why that are you going to convert to purchase? And that's the number one Achilles heel I see the whole time, which is your why is not strong enough. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, this is fascinating because do you know Seth Godin is the marketing sort of...
You read a lot more than me, I can tell you that.
Well, but anyway, so he was like, he came on the podcast, which was like a fucking dream come true. So he's basically inspired me to everything really, which was just like a full circle moment. But I was talking about trends and he was saying, and this guy's like, I think he's 60, 65. So he's seen it and worked in marketing his whole life. And he was saying with food and drink, you see moments of inspiration followed by long tails of commodity, which is exactly with Vita Coco, is it's like race to the bottom. So it's like you have with coconut water, race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And I think, gut health with these sodas, race, then eventually it's going to happen. As you say, you've seen 15 pitch decks. It's going to eventually go to a thing where it's a race to the bottom. How can brands, and we'll wrap this up because I've just realised you've got to go soon, but how can brands really make their why ironclad for the consumer? Like what's some of the things they can do and how do you do that Vita Coco? Well, ultimately the why is what makes it work.
Again, when you talk about proudest thing, and I think Mike would say the same, right? I will, again, have to be careful because we're never complacent and you literally obsess every day to make sure you stay where you are. But the amount of people that told us that coconut water wouldn't last, it was a fad. Whereas we knew it's been drunk across the globe, particularly in hotter climates, daily ritual everywhere. And it was just about bringing that particularly to the Western world and where that looked. And coming up, obviously I stepped out after 12, 13 years, but I think Mike's coming up to their 20-year anniversary.
They're based in New York.
Yeah. But the number one word I'm trying to explain there is longevity, right? Everybody said it'd be a fad. The number one thing you need to provide is why there is a longevity for the brand or category of what you're doing, because it's been so resilient and it's kept going and it's kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And, Mike's well over 500 million sales now. The market cap of Vita Coco is over 2 billion today, right, on the stock exchange. And it's got this brilliant ability to show that more and more consumers are coming into the brand every day, but importantly, existing consumers are buying more and drinking more each day as well. So I think in terms of...
Do you think brands can drive fads to trends to like...
If the why is strong enough...
Brands can lead it.
And clear enough, then yes. There's a reason why. I think you're about to see one of the things I think you're about to see a big danger on at the moment is that when you talk about future trends, I think you're about to see a world where, at the moment, if you're not careful, I think everybody's sat there in the morning, a lot of people are, particularly people who are into like kind of fitness and putting good stuff in the body. Sat there, I know people, including myself, I'm sat there and I've suddenly got 20 supplements, right? You take this, do this, blah, blah. It's madness. And I actually think, there's a brand like Heights at the moment that's going, look, forget all the noise, you just need one thing, this is it. And I think you're going to see, there's a global trend around personalization, but also I think there's a global trend around simplification as well, in that people just want to know that if I drink or eat this, it does this, but importantly, the wider that it does, but importantly, to the level you require, I think that's what's going to happen. Because it's like me at the moment. I'm now rattled on what I take because I'm taking turmeric and all bits and pieces because I'm told, bits and pieces for my training or just general lifestyle and stuff like that. But I think you're going to see a lot more simplification coming. People who can just make consumers' lives easier are going to do really, really well. But going back,
that's what Huel's basically done, hasn't it? Really?
Huel's a great example.
And I like the Rory Southern talks about
complete meal solution there and then.
Yeah,
boom, that does it.
But also, I think the fact it doesn't taste as good as a Yazoo is what is. Yeah. It's just that's genius.
But what you have to think about there is Huel are marketing themselves in such a good way. So it's no different than saying, well, yeah, but surely then everybody's still just having a multivitamin and you just need your A to Z multivitamin, everything's okay. No, because that's not enough for a lot of people. They're now trying to take excess. Huel have done really well because they've communicated exactly what is in their product, why that's all they need, and the buck stops there. And and they've got the consumer saying, yeah, that's all I need to do. I'm happy. I've nailed that.
What do you think are some of the trends that will melt into fads, and what do you think are some of the fads that potentially will be the Vita Coco, will be the Innocent, will be the Moju?
I think just generally speaking, macro trends. We talked about personalization. So I think it's not going to be long between whatever you've got on your watch or on your wrist or on your phone. We'll just tell you straight away. Here's your recommended order, or I've got all these things. And, we talked about it on Bio and Me, that we think we can do something where people answer 10 questions and we can personalize exactly what they need from us. So I think personalization is a big one. I've talked about that simplification bit. I think in terms of macro trends, I think collagen and gut health is just going to be huge. I think gut health probably will be the same size, if not bigger than protein as a macro trend. What you're now seeing, though, is really interesting because people think protein's gone to its level and is still going to be there, but the protein's about to go again. So you're now...
What makes you think that?
Have a look at the US. It's absolutely juggernauting again. Because beforehand, it was just particularly the fitness and active lifestyle people getting into it. But now people are realizing that a high protein diet can benefit so many more range of consumers, particularly anything from kids, females with pregnancy, menopause, all that sort of stuff. And protein is now being integrated into so many different diet requirements that suddenly people are realizing that protein is incredibly hot as a general lifestyle. So the addressable audience has probably gone up 40%. And when you look at globally, the amount of people now being advised to take more protein, it's quite frightening. So I think protein and gut health are going to be absolutely huge. And then obviously the other big area in consumer goods and food, we won't talk about the whole sustainability bit because anything that, I think every single product or service, unless people pick that up and know that they're doing something that is less detrimental and more importantly has a positive impact on the planet, I think that's going to become a prerequisite for products. If you aren't having a positive impact as a brand, whether you're a product or service on the environment, people are going to stop shopping you. So I think you've got to do that. But I think going back to consumer goods and food and drink, I think this whole nootropics, adaptogens, another big area there, which is obviously a lot of this stuff is kind of positively influencing the mind. And again, putting stuff into your body that has functional benefits that are akin to that sort of product. So I think, again, mushroom is going to be a massive growth area. Yeah. And you're seeing some good brands. You've seen Space Goods, you've seen Dirty, there's Days & Co. There's loads of nice brands doing that. That's a big space.
As in terms of the consumer piece, is again a massive addict to coffee as well. But that Space Goods really does work. Libby from Piper Investments says that there'll only ever be one winner in a category. What are your thoughts on that?
Do I don't agree with that. Is she talking from a challenger brand perspective?
Yeah. Piper Investment as in...
Yeah. I think it's... I think I do agree with that, but then there are always some categories that will challenge that. And that is, for example, let's take energy drinks. I think both Red Bull and Monster have been very successful alongside each other, because I almost argue slightly differently. And I'm not by the way, I know Libby, and she's an incredible operator, right? And very, very smart. The only thing I would say is that quite often you need multiple good challenger brands to build the category to its potential. So for example, on coconut water, I don't think we'd have got coconut water as a total category to the size we got it to unless we had the likes of Innocent, Naked, Harmless Harvest all spending money helping us drive awareness and then building the category to the level. Yes, I would say we're the lead brand out there today, but there are still some other brands out there, and I'm sure somebody else will come again. And you have to be a little bit careful on this, because it's like, take smoothies as an example. Today, Innocent is the number one smoothie, right? But everybody would have said, don't go anywhere near smoothies again. But then have a look at what something like Mockingbird's now doing. So Mockingbird is actually a reincarnation of Savzi, right? So that they bought the...
Oh, I didn't realise that.
They bought the assets of Savzi and Mockingbird. Mockingbird is absolutely smashing it in there, and actually, is a good second player to Innocent. And I suspect Innocent are happy about that, because I think Mockingbird are bringing new consumers or lapsed consumers back into the category. And then it's Innocent's job then to say, well, how do we then, convert them back or bring them into Innocent as a brand?
What are your thoughts on other brands? Because that category piece is interesting. Is actually, you can compete with, I think people are by default competitive, founders are. So they look at their other challenger brands as a competitor set. And this is what Mark Palmer told me. He goes, actually, that you can do that, but fuck me, you're going to be quite paranoid, miserable, like all those things.
Yeah.
Slightly different with Vita Coco, because you guys were much bigger then. But he was actually saying, so say it was peanut butter, Manny Life versus Pippa Nuts. Like, we could compete with each other, or we could both just try and knock off Sunpat, try and knock off. And he was basically saying, go after the big incumbent. Like, how do you think on...
Yeah, you basically, I think what you do is, slight various, because you can go after the big incumbent, but if your consumer demographic is completely different, it doesn't help, right? But if you've got a lot of
consumer why, right?
Yeah. Okay. Exactly that, right? And I think you can do that. And I think, good examples. I've got, again, Ember, which is the meat. Right? Those guys are doing a really, really good job, because, we've looked at, you've got brands such as King's and other brands in the category who are well-established meat snacking brands, but they said, look, how do we win? And they've basically said, look, we think we can win on product better than those guys, deliver a much more tasty, higher moisture, so less dry, built on, etc. But also in a more sustainable way they talk very heavily about regenerative farming with a really nice, strong brand that has a really nice premium edge to it. And Ember's just now absolutely flying, because the why is strong, so strong in that category. Suddenly the retailer's gone, actually, we see the role you play, actually, because there's this premiumization happening in that category, and people want the quality of meat and they want the high protein source. And they've, against the 2 or 3 competitors in that space, Ember have done a really good job on that. So I think, again, I'd answer that slightly different to and again, I'm not trying to be controversial here.
Yeah, I just like getting
different. I hugely respect both. I mean, Mark and I have worked together.
But he's on Ember as well, isn't he?
He's on Ember, exactly. Yeah. But I think what it comes down to is that I think you can have multiple challenger brands in a category if each brand's why is big enough. If you have a positioning and you're strong enough, and you can be, if you can be successful, I think multiple brands can operate. But ultimately, the brand that has the strongest why to the consumer and continues to evolve and reinvent itself as when you grow with your consumer and doesn't fatigue, that's the one that ultimately will come out on top. That's the bottom line. You can't stand still. You've got to evolve and stuff like that. You've got to do it differently. And again, one brand, I know they're only 2.5, 3 years old, but people said to me originally with, Surreal, I love their Surreal marketing and stuff like that, but it's going to fatigue a bit. But you just watch how they've taken it on already.
So what do you think?
Unbelievable.
What do you, because Jack's he's had a kid, he's got a knee operation, hasn't he, or something? So I'm trying to pin them down.
Kit's got 2 kids now.
Yeah. So I've literally been emailing them and back and forth for like ages, and we're going to make it happen hopefully in Jan. But final thing, like what's going to make them successful, do you think? Because as you say, a lot of people write it off. I don't know how to say written off that category, saying, like, what? How do you think they're gonna? What's their sort of...
that brand? I can't. I mean, they are the numbers on in 2.5 years. They're at a scale most brands haven't got to in 4 or 5 years. Absolutely flying. there's a number of things you've got there. You've got two incredibly complementary founders who are both top of their game.
Which is what?
So Jack is more commercial supply chain. Kit he's the brand and the marketeer, and he's doing both and complement each other really well.
Yeah.
They've also got an ex-Innocent guy who does a lot of the copy and stuff in there. A guy called John who does an incredible job. So I think you've got a winning team there. I think you've also then got a product that is bang on trend with consumer need states and will continue to be. High protein. You've then got obviously zero sugar and low carbs. That trend is a very big trend for consumers, not going away. You've got a great tasting product. You're bringing in relevant flavors, exciting flavors. I mean, look at the partnership they did with Gymshark.
So good.
And you've got Gymshark logoed, cereal pieces. People are going absolutely mad for it. I don't know if you saw a week ago, they just launched their limited edition honeycomb, which is unbelievably tasting. It's brilliant. And I'm just sat there absolutely wetting myself on the whole Winnie the Pooh versus Paddington Bear off they're having.
Jokes.
And do you know what I mean? Good. It's just, people need this in their life every day, particularly with the rubbish we've got going on around us and all the austerity. I don't know what they're talking about, not returning to austerity. The government, we are going back to austerity, whether we like it or not. You need brands that bring a moment of sunshine to your day, and that's what someone like Surreal's doing. Outstanding,
mate. Look, I know you've got to run. You've got another meeting. I've absolutely fucking loved that. It was banging, and there's just mind is bubbling with wisdom. It was absolute gold. So
thank you for having me again.
Mate,
it's been great.
I'm next November.
Always happy to do it. It doesn't have to be annual. It could be biannual. And if there's anything you ever need or you want me to talk about, I'm always happy to talk about it. But mate, thank you, and mate, it's great to see the podcast grow so much because you're doing really, really well with it. So it's great.
I appreciate that.
Good people deserve to do well, and you're one of them.
Oh, thank you so much, mate. Right, that was sick.